Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening, and if it is? Xiaomi raised an eyebrow. I've faced worse. If Valuala really wants to test me, so be it. And if the Princess of Gold is telling the truth, then securing the relic for Sakura as soon as possible isn't a bad outcome either. Especially in the former case. If Valuala was beginning to show signs of distrust, there was no longer any need for Xiaomi to uphold noble pretense or remain loyal to their side. After all, Bartolomeo had made more than one attempt to recruit him. He wouldn't even need to take action himself. If he were ousted from the Democratic faction, the banner he'd helped raise would naturally collapse. Xiaomi hadn't responded to Bartolomeo because his footing in the Democratic faction had always been solid, and Lord Valuala had always placed great trust in him. He had no intention of betraying his allies for a petty gain. But all splits begin with the tiniest cracks in trust. It was Inurai who had introduced Xiaomi to Reigns, a member of the aristocratic faction, as her tutor. And now it was Inurai who was testing him. That alone meant Xiaomi had more than enough ways to handle whatever trials might come. Things might not end up that bad. Seeing Xiaomi get serious, Korin had no choice but to temper the mood with a slightly more cautious tone. Chapter 128. After that, Gray returned to her room to get some rest, while Xiaomi stayed behind to look after Korin. The two chatted idly from time to time, and before long, Korin dozed off under the influence of her masochistic spiritualist constitution. When she opened her eyes again, there was a sharp knock at the door. Gray was knocking urgently from outside. Korin crawled out from under the covers and opened the door, only to find the Gray the keeper girl visibly flustered. It wasn't the usual awkwardness she showed when dealing with strangers. This time, it felt like something serious had happened. "What's going on?" Korin asked. Gray hesitated, looking like she didn't know where to begin. "I'm not sure where to start." "Then just start with the outcome." Korin yawned, turned around, and headed into the washroom to freshen up, leaving Gray waiting at the door. "You're right." Gray lowered her head. "I'll start with the outcome. This morning, the Princess of Gold was found dead in her room." "The one from last night?" Korin checked her reflection in the mirror, making sure the holy stigmata had faded. "What a coincidence. Just said she was going to flee, and now the next day she's found dead in her room. Did someone from the Islama family find her?" She calmly pieced together the information. If that was the case, then the Princess of Gold hadn't been lying last night. "It's more than that," Gray said, her face clouded with worry. "Teacher Xiaomi is the prime suspect. He is being interrogated right now." Korin went quiet for a moment, then let out a deep sigh. "So they finally decided to make their move." "Make their move?" Gray asked, confused. "Don't mind me. Just thinking out loud." Korin brushed her hair back. "Looks like something unexpected happened while I was asleep. Fill me in with the details on the way." Once she had finished washing up, Korin followed Gray toward the Tower of the Moon. The Princess of Gold's room was located there. Everyone who had stayed behind after yesterday's social gathering had now gathered at the tower. According to Gray, Xiaomi had gone to the Princess of Gold's room early in the morning as scheduled, but no one answered the door. When he picked up the scent of blood behind it, he opened it by himself. And that's precisely why he was suspected. Just like the Princess of Gold had said the night before, the sisters' rooms were secured with magecraft locks. Magecraft locks are a type of ceremonial equipment. They come in various forms but typically use the user's mana wavelength as a key. These locks are expensive, exclusive to Magus, and difficult to reassign to a different user. However, their higher reliability has made them a common choice among Magus. Even the Clock Tower's treasury uses this kind of lock. By that logic, only the Princess of Gold should have been able to unlock her door. But Xiaomi was an exception. He could use a type of magecraft called the knock spell, which allowed him to simulate the owner's wavelength without damaging the magecraft lock, thus unlocking it while leaving the lock functional. So, even though the Islama family had been notified immediately after the discovery, Inurai, who was still there and served as the head of the Valuala family, couldn't deny Shiomi's potential involvement. That lord knew of some of Shiomi's unique magecraft. In the past, when Valuala had been unable to investigate a missing treasure vault keeper, Inarai had entrusted Shiomi with the matter. Shiomi had unlocked the vault and demonstrated the existence of the knock spell at that time. Ultimately, because the magecraft was deemed too difficult to teach, lacking a formal theoretical foundation, and not valuable enough, the clock tower had simply documented it and filed it away. It's just like how locksmiths have to register with the local police department. I miscalculated. When I smelled blood, my first thought wasn't to call for help, but to open the door. Shiomi sat in the reception room next to the Princess of Gold's quarters, facing Inarai across from him and Byron standing behind the sofa. No. Even if I hadn't done anything, I'd still be the prime suspect. When Karan arrived, Shiomi appeared entirely unfazed by his situation, casually facing one of the 3 great noble lords of the clock tower, along with the head of their branch family. Don't act like that, Shiomi, Inarai said with a composed smile. You are indeed the most suspicious, but I still trust you. To me, if you were the real killer, the scene wouldn't have been so gruesome. The Princess of Gold had died on her bed, her body savagely dismembered into 12 parts. That kind of murder didn't match Shiomi's methods. As a former sealing designation executor, Inarai knew Shiomi's style well. Clean and efficient, ending the enemy in a single blow. The most recent case was the previous lord, Elmel Oi. Though the autopsy confirmed that Kenneth had sustained injuries during the magecraft duel. Shiomi had even turned Kenneth's own technique against him, creating symptoms of mercury poisoning. The fatal strike had been the one that pierced his heart. Had it been an assassination rather than a head-on battle, the Princess of Gold would have either been found lying peacefully on the bed, breathless, or there wouldn't have been a body left at all. That's why, even though Inarai didn't exclude Shiomi as the primary suspect, she still believed he wasn't the one who killed the Princess of Gold. It's reassuring that Lady Inarai understands where I'm coming from, Shiomi said with a faint smile. He had already explained to Inarai about his final meeting with the Princess of Gold the night before. What they talked about and what had happened. Even her father, Byron, couldn't help but believe she had planned to escape. If Shiomi had truly gone through with their original plan to flee with both the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver, then not just Valuala, but even Byron Eloi would have had a hard time tracking them down. I understand. But I'm afraid I can't let you return as scheduled today, Inarai said. You're placing me under house arrest? Shiomi asked. Inarai's eyes glinted shrewdly. No need for the sarcasm, Shiomi. You're not staying because Valuala can detain you. You're staying because you don't want to leave. So in other words. Shiomi glanced at the other guests in the room. They had all stayed behind after the gathering, each for their own reasons. They were suspects too. But none more suspicious than Shiomi. Islama won't mistreat you or your companions while the investigation continues, Inarai said, turning to Karan and Gray at the door. Please remain at the Twin Tower until everything is cleared up. Since I was the one who invited you here, I bear some responsibility. Of course. It's not like I can just walk away after being turned from guest to murder suspect overnight. Sitting in a relaxed posture, Shiomi slowly smiled, his teeth flashing with a cold glint. Chapter 129, I never thought the day would come when I'd be the one assigned to keep an eye on you. An hour later, outside the Tower of the Moon. The one who followed Tenkai Shiomi out was Tuko Ozaki. As Shiomi crouched to inspect the densely packed footprints on the grass, Tuko spoke from behind. Back then, it would have been me, the sealing designation executor, sent to investigate your movements. Shiomi let out a small laugh. They say the tallest tree in the forest is the first to be blown down by the wind. I finally understand what that really means. Tuko flicked open a lighter and lit a cigarette. You're just too far outside the norm. Magecraft locks, refined through generations of magus, are now designed to be unbreakable except through brute force. But you bypassed all of that. Unlocked it perfectly without even damaging the lock. Just some preliminary application of the primordial runes. Shiomi stayed crouched, studying the ground closely. You know as well as I do, of the first 18 runes ever discovered, the last one's true purpose was known only to the great god Odin. But the other 17 already cover virtually every aspect of existence. Used properly, there's practically no situation rune magecraft can't handle. Tuko couldn't help but chuckle. So why did you agree to help the Princess of Gold escape? As one of Lady Inarai's favored talents, you had no reason to offend Valuala. At first, I thought it was Lady Inarai testing my loyalties. It wasn't until I found the princess dead that I realized. She genuinely wanted to run. Shiomi sighed. And I keep wondering. If I hadn't agreed to help her, would she still be alive? All this sentimentality. Are you mourning a lost life, or regretting that Islama's magecraft masterpiece has gone to waste? Tuko asked. The former, Shiomi said as he stood. Though it does mean the reward she promised me has vanished too. What kind of reward? Tuko sounded intrigued. A holy relic, Shiomi answered without hesitation. The Princess of Gold apparently knew our eldest daughter wanted to enter the Fifth Holy Grail War. And knew we still lacked a relic. I also heard Islama had recently acquired a valuable magecraft artifact, something that could serve as a holy relic. I see, Tuko nodded thoughtfully. That child. Her name was Sakura, wasn't it? Yeah. The one adopted from the Tasaka family. Shiomi smiled faintly. The second daughter of Tokiomi Tasaka. The one who asked me to find you for help with his prosthetic. Tuko nodded, dropping the subject. Any progress with the investigation? Hard to say. Shiomi pointed toward the forest by the lake shore behind the Tower of the Moon. But the Princess of Gold's trail definitely leads that way. I'm just here to observe. If you're heading in, go ahead. Just don't pull one of your clever tricks and vanish from my view, Tuko said, spreading her hands. Today, she was dressed casually in the same kind of outfit she wore when she opened the Garland Hall in Tokyo, shirt and jeans. Her relaxed demeanor made her seem like a completely different person from the one who had attended last night's formal gathering. Then again, from a certain perspective, maybe she really was a different person. Shiomi would rank it as the second best entry in the Tuko joke archives. The first was something that couldn't be mentioned at all. He waved a hand, and runes shimmered into existence, transforming into glowing powder before fading into the grass. In their place, a trail of faint footprints appeared, glowing as they stretched deeper into the forest. Shiomi and Tuko followed them in, one after the other. Lady Inurai really has a twisted sense of humor, making me your minder, Tuko remarked. Not just one suspect watching another, but an old acquaintance tailing a familiar face. It was even more outrageous than assigning Karin to keep tabs on Shiomi. You mean she's not worried I might bribe you and forge an alibi? Shiomi laughed. It's definitely possible. If you casually show me a primordial rune I can't decipher, I'll be on your side. Tuko nodded. How much grudge are you holding over this? Is it more than the one you've got over your sister stealing your chance to inherit the family? Shiomi asked. That was Tuko's third most joked about topic. Exhaling a puff of smoke, Tuko shot back cheerfully, if I could get all the primordial runes, the fifth magic can go to hell. What are you even saying? Shiomi clicked his tongue at her wild ambition. But Inurai's move really was ruthless. Whether or not Tuko covered for Shiomi during the surveillance, if things went south afterward, suspicion would only deepen for both of them. Even though she claimed to trust Shiomi, Inurai was still testing him. And even her own student. As they ventured deeper into the forest, thick fog clouded their vision, cutting visibility to a ridiculous degree. This wasn't natural weather, but a barrier set by the forest's owners. The Islama family. An even more elaborate barrier than the Innsburn forest in Fuiuki. Shiomi stepped over a rugged gully filled with decaying branches and animal waste, then turned and offered his hand to Tuko. Only to recall she was a grand magus, unlikely to be tripped up by the forest's deliberately untamed terrain. Thanks. Tuko took his hand naturally before he could pull it back, stepping over the meter-wide ditch with ease. Shiomi nodded in response and glanced around at the fog-drenched forest. Quite the magical ground. No wonder the Islama family built the twin towers here. If it weren't for this murder case, I'd have invited you to stroll through the forest, Tuko joked. Hey, come on. You know I already. Before Shiomi could finish, he suddenly turned and raised his hand. A barrier of mana instantly formed, shielding them from a sudden attack. After a violent impact, Shiomi dropped the shield and took a few steps in the direction the assailant had fallen. Releasing Tuko's hand, he prepared his next spell. An automata. Don't tell me it's yours, Tuko? Shiomi's voice sharpened. Tuko removed her glasses. That thing's clearly an antique. Better than anything I've made. Just as magecraft accumulates mystery with age, so does putcraft. The older the automata, the better its craftsmanship. Surpassing even Tuko's own work. Clearly, the automatons lurking in this forest, likely property of the Islama family, belong to that category. Oh, by the way, one of the reasons I was invited to Islama was to repair these antiques. Even in her cold, detached tone, Tuko felt the need to explain. We'll settle this later, Shiomi said through gritted teeth. Chapter 130. As soon as Shiomi finished speaking, the automata that had collapsed onto the ground stood up from the grass with a grotesque, twisting motion. Not even a human could rise like that. Tuko, step back. Shiomi launched himself forward, charging at the blade-wielding automata barehanded. They clashed 3 times. His hands moved like forged weapons, tracing the arc of a sword's swing, colliding with the automata's linear strikes at incredible speed. Tuko watched silently from where she stood. After years apart, she was once again convinced. Xiaomi had grown even stronger. To engage a weapon-wielding automata in close combat with nothing but bare hands. It was already a feat that placed him above most magus. After a brief exchange, the automata crouched low in silence. It had recognized that Xiaomi wasn't a target it could easily eliminate and began transitioning to its next phase. What came next defied imagination. Its limbs split further, sprouting sharp blades. Even its previously refined face suddenly cracked open, revealing multiple new eyes. 3 heads and 6 arms. Xiaomi muttered, watching the transformation as he slowly drew a golden dagger from his coat. It was the erosion. After returning from Blackmore village, Morgan had entrusted it to Xiaomi, telling him to keep it on hand for self-defense. The term 3 heads and 6 arms symbolized a divine attribute. Omniscience and omnipresence. The most famous legend was that of Nisa, the third Lotus Prince. Of course, Nisa also had a more advanced form with 3 heads and 8 arms. But that had nothing to do with this situation. Seems like this one won't go down easily. Want me to jump in? Tuko asked, arms crossed, calmly watching Xiaomi. Can you keep up with me, or with that thing? Xiaomi reversed his grip on the erosion and leapt forward, just as the automata sprang up. The automata's speed had clearly increased. But Xiaomi adjusted instantly to match it. Taking down this automata wouldn't be difficult. What filled Xiaomi's mind now was suspicion. Was this thing part of the forest's automatic defense system? Or had someone connected to Islama secretly activated it to launch an attack on him and Tuko? He needed to uncover the truth behind it. From the moment the Princess of Gold arrived, Xiaomi had sensed something off about the Twin Tower. And when he discovered her corpse earlier that morning, that uneasy feeling solidified. It felt like his invitation to Islama's social event had been part of a scheme from the very beginning. Now, Xiaomi's biggest question was this conspiracy aimed at him personally, or at Valhalla, the force backing him? In the span of just a few seconds, he and the automata clashed 17 times, golden dagger against blades. Even with 6 blades, it wasn't enough to trouble Xiaomi. After all, even the King of Heroes, who had once opened dozens of treasure vaults and unleashed countless noble phantasms at him, had failed to bring him down. The clash with the automata shook the entire forest. Wind blades tore through the dense mist, slicing leaves from the trees. Even the falling leaves were cut apart midair. It seems that this alone is not enough to lure out the mastermind behind this, Xiaomi said as he returned to Tuko. Tuko's cigarette was less than half smoked, and she tapped the ash off it. Go ahead. If anything goes wrong, I'll help you fix it as compensation. That's what I wanted to hear. Xiaomi replied cheerfully, then rushed out. Okay, that's it. In the thick fog, a soft clapping sound rang out. Xiaomi abruptly stopped, and the automata froze. He looked ahead into the dense fog, where a figure about 1.6 meters tall spoke those words. The mist concealed the person's appearance, but Xiaomi could make out that they wore a robe that reached below the knees, with hair even longer, almost trailing to the ankles. It was a petite young girl. In an instant, Xiaomi's internal alarm hit its highest level. The voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. The tone, though. That was even more familiar. Before Xiaomi could turn back to warn Tuko to retreat, a boundless darkness spread out from the figure, and in the blink of an eye, Xiaomi was engulfed in it. The feeling of grass and soil beneath his feet vanished, replaced by the sensation of drifting in an endless sea. Who are you? Xiaomi tensed, every muscle in his body tightening. He couldn't move, as if something had locked him in place, rendering him unable to react. It's been 9 years since we last greeted each other like this. No, almost 10 now. The petite voice came from behind him. But the next moment, it came from above. As expected of a magus from the land of shadows. You completed the task I assigned without a hitch. Then, she suddenly appeared before Xiaomi. Even in the pitch-black void, he could vaguely make out her silhouette. She wore a white blouse and black skirt, with a red ribbon tied in a bow at the collar, a wide-sleeved trench coat, and knee-high socks. Her purple hair was impossibly long, cascading like a waterfall. Cute and dangerous. That was the first description that came to Xiaomi's mind. Xiaomi forced himself to speak. You don't seem like a system. Who are you? Good question. But let me correct you. I am indeed a system, just one that's more advanced and exceptional than humans. Don't get it wrong next time. This time, the girl appeared behind Xiaomi, and something like a pointer landed near his shoulder. With every sentence she spoke, her position shifted. It was as if she were casually strolling through this space, freely changing her location at will. In that moment, Xiaomi understood why he was immobilized. Authority. Something beyond the miracles a human could wield. It had dragged him out from the forest's fog barrier and sealed all his movements. What do you want? Xiaomi asked. To be honest, I don't want anything," the girl said in a voice that sounded pouty. "Then why did you show up? Isn't sending messages directly into my mind like before enough?" Shiomi asked. "Of course I came to check on our Magus. To see whether he's been slacking off and letting his combat skills rust while staying off the front lines," the girl said, lightly tapping her palm with her pointer. "As for meeting in person like this, that's because none of your enemies are strong enough. Our Magus has zero sense of urgency right now." Her tone shifted constantly. One moment arrogant, the next pitiful, then like a troublesome neighbor girl. But there was no doubt she was putting on an act. And thoroughly enjoying it. Chapter 131, Who are you? Shiomi asked again. "Are you the one who threw me into the land of shadows and brought me before my master?" The girl let out a soft laugh. "Oh my, I'm terribly sorry, but I can't answer that just yet. It's classified under a higher level of encryption. So don't even think about using something like the Holy Grail to solve the mystery." She knew things Shiomi had never spoken aloud, and it was hard not to suspect his thoughts were being completely monitored. "Ah, don't get the wrong idea. I'm not spying on your brain." The girl leaned in. Her face remained hidden in the darkness, and Shiomi couldn't make out her features. Just the mischievous smile at her lips. "Your thoughts are just too predictable. Anyone who knows your background could easily deduce them with a little calculation, don't you think?" It was true. For someone aware of Shiomi's circumstances, figuring out what he planned to do with the Holy Grail wasn't exactly a mystery. "Now, back to your question," the girl said as she turned around. "Unfortunately, it's still not time for introductions. So, you don't need to know who I am." Suddenly, she spun around and said to Shiomi, "But since you've taken in two girls, I suppose I could call you daddy if you'd like?" "What kind of joke is that?" Shiomi clenched his fists, clearly unimpressed. The girl looked like her pride had been wounded and lightly tapped him on the head with her pointer. "Honestly? Ignoring a girl's attempt to be affectionate? Is that how you take care of kids?" "I've never seen any girl hit an adult on the head," Shiomi muttered, the corner of his eye twitching. Realizing she might have gone a bit far, the girl cleared her throat. "Ahem. Right then. Back to the main topic. The Magus is in deep trouble." Shiomi, still unable to move in the space that felt locked in place, could only move his mouth. "I'm starting to suspect you're the one who killed the Princess of Gold." "PFFT. Completely wrong." The girl crossed her arms. "I'm just a delicate young lady who couldn't hurt a fly. How could I do something so horrifying?" Shiomi couldn't help scoffing inwardly. "A weak little girl, huh? So you just use your authority to mess with people instead?" "But the Princess of Gold's death is only the beginning," the girl suddenly said, her tone turning cold. "More blood will be on your hands. Struggle as hard as you want. If this minor crisis is enough to stop you, then your journey ends here." "What does that mean?" Shiomi's heart jumped. He remembered something Gilgamesh had said before being defeated in the final battle of the Holy Grail War. A question he still had no answer to. He hurried to press the girl for more. "All right, let's stop here." The girl's tone became sweet and innocent again. "But just separating you from the puppeteer like this feels a bit boring. So, I've prepared a little gift for you. Enjoy it." Before Shiomi could ask anything else, the sensation of being paralyzed and trapped in that space vanished all at once. The sudden freedom made him feel as if he'd come back from the dead. The darkness faded. He was back in the forest, shrouded in thick fog. The girl was nowhere to be seen. Shiomi turned around and saw Tuko. She was holding her head, clearly also caught up in that mysterious girl's domain just moments ago. What was that just now? Tuko looked at Shiomi, as if about to ask something. But Shiomi moved first, flipping the dagger in his hand and throwing it at her. Tuko had no time to dodge. For a moment, she thought Shiomi was attacking her. But the dagger whistled past her cheek. Behind her ear came the sound of something being pierced, followed by a mechanical whine of something breaking. She turned slightly, and saw the automata's head impaled by the golden dagger, its body collapsing backward in defeat. Shiomi walked over and pulled the dagger free. "Isn't it three-headed and six-armed?" Tuko also noticed something was off. The three-headed, six-armed automata was still standing in the woods about 10 meters away, its shape obscured by the thick fog. Then came the creaking and groaning of metal from deeper in the forest. Figures identical to that automata emerged from the mist. All of them were built to the same specifications, and they quickly encircled Shiomi and Tuko. Not only that, each automata began vibrating at the same frequency. Their limbs split apart, revealing sharpened blades. In the end, more than a dozen three-headed, six-armed automata had surrounded them. Shiomi spun the erosion in his hand. Oh dear, oh dear. Looks like I won't be able to leave the rest of the fight to you after all," Tuko said coldly as she took stock of each automata's position. She had helped Izilma repair her dolls before, But as far as she knew, Izluma didn't have this many automata. Just the sheer number of them exceeded the financial capacity of a Magus family branch like hers. Each of these ancient automata was worth a fortune. Considering Izluma had invested everything into the pursuit of aesthetic perfection, it was hard to imagine they could afford this many. So this is what she meant by a little gift, huh? Shiomi murmured. He stood back to back with Tuko. Izluma must have detected them as soon as they entered the forest. Shiomi hadn't planned to make much of a scene. But given how things were playing out, he couldn't confidently say how over-spec the automata left behind by that girl truly were. Who is that girl? Tuko asked. I wish I knew, Shiomi said with a bitter smile. Probably someone who holds a grudge against me. I'll handle the first wave. You take the offensive? No problem. Even if it meant dying, Tuko had no intention of letting a body go to waste. Especially not when they still had a way to cleanly resolve the crisis at hand. Then let's go. As if signaling the start of the battle, Shiomi's voice dropped. And the automata surged in from all directions, moving with an eerie, coordinated rhythm as they closed in on the two. The 11th of the primordial runes, the rune of the shield. Unlike the 13 that govern protection, this rune granted warriors safe return from the battlefield. If the wielder was powerful enough, it could even overturn certain death. Shiomi activated his magecraft. The automata came rushing in like a net closing from all sides. They tightened the encirclement. Beams of light burst from between their shifting forms as crystal mayflies materialized around Tuko. They assembled into several cannon-like structures and fired powerful magic bullets at the advancing automata. The dolls were bombarded in a blast of explosions, flung apart uncontrollably. Several were struck head-on, pierced through, and crashed lifelessly to the ground. With an opening torn through their ranks, Shiomi dashed out, charging straight at the nearest automata. Chapter 132, In the end, these automata were still just antiques. Older, and shrouded in deeper mystery. Their combat capabilities were indeed excellent, whether serving as guardians of the forest or as frontline attackers. That is, if they hadn't picked the wrong opponents. With Shiomi and Tuko working together, they managed to tear open a breach in the encirclement of over a dozen automata. The magic bullets fired at point-blank range by Ozaki Tuko's mystic code, Crystal Mayfly, destroyed several of the machines outright. The first automata had been an automated defense unit embedded in the barrier of the Izluma forest. The rest were left behind by that mysterious, elusive girl of unknown origin. Whatever her motives, Shiomi had no reason to hold back. He darted through the forest, slashing with the erosion. Severing necks, cleaving off heads, or driving the blade straight into the monocores in their chests. The automata that hadn't been destroyed by the magic bombardment were quickly reduced to just a few. These remaining units also possessed battlefield assessment functions. Realizing the tide had turned, they rapidly retreated into the depths of the fog-veiled forest. Shiomi's instincts screamed that he couldn't let them go. Especially when the first unit had already been indistinguishable from those the girl had left behind. Even he couldn't tell them apart. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and gave chase deeper into the woods. Tuko, who had just finished stowing away her mystic code, was momentarily stunned but quickly followed. Whether it was due to the so-called surveillance or simply because they were old friends, she couldn't bring herself to abandon Shiomi at a moment like this. Shiomi hadn't gotten far. By tracing his magical energy, Tuko soon found him in a clearing nestled within the forest. Among the dense, verdant woods, this spot stood out. An unmistakably special space. Judging by the spring bubbling up from the earth, this had to be the spiritual wellspring of the Izluma family's sacred land. In Western traditions, springs that gushed forth from the ground had long been regarded as divine miracles. Signs of sainthood. We've been played, Shiomi muttered, arms hanging at his sides, addressing Tuko as she approached from behind. Tenkai. Tuko was surprised by the tone in his voice. But she already had a rough idea. At some point when she wasn't looking, Shiomi had clearly attracted the attention of someone. Or something. That defied Magus logic. Back in the darkness, when she and Shiomi had been separated, she too had spoken with that mysterious girl. And her instincts, honed over years of experience, told her the girl was no ordinary existence. Shiomi slowly turned around and let out a scornful laugh. Tuko's gaze dropped. She saw the golden dagger in his hand. Its blade was stained with fresh crimson. A heavy metallic scent lingered in the mist. The unmistakable scent of blood. Human blood. A dagger, of course, was a tool for killing, and it wasn't strange for one to be blood-stained. But their opponents had just been automata. Purely mechanical constructs. Even when shattered by magic, they never bled. Her eyes shifted to the other figure floating in the spring. Was this another of the gifts the nameless girl had left behind? That's what Tuko was thinking. That's what Shiomi was thinking too. The more pressing question now. How were they supposed to face Izluma? Floating in the spring was a woman. She was the mirror image. Or perhaps the other half. Of the corpse they had found that morning, the Princess of Gold. The Princess of Silver. This really is. Even with her colder persona, Tuko couldn't help but give a troubled smile. She slowly put on her glasses. Unlike the Princess of Gold, who had been dismembered, the Princess of Silver's body was almost entirely intact. She lay still with her eyes closed, as if simply bathing in the spring. But the water around her had long been stained deep red. The blood soaking the once clear spring came from a slender, precise wound just below her neck. A single strike that ended her life, sending her to the same place as her sister. Could it be? From the very beginning, Tuko began to analyze the situation. But time gave them no room to reflect. Ah, please wait. Don't move, Shiomi-kun, Tuko. A voice called out from behind them. Inurai. The elderly woman in a green formal gown stood at the edge of the leafy forest, looking straight at the two of them. I didn't expect to run into you at the scene of the crime. Or should I say? Am I catching you in the act? Her tone wasn't casual. It carried the weight of severity. Shiomi didn't move. This is Valuala's domain. You already knew when Tuko and I were sealed inside this barrier, didn't you, Lady Inurai? Indeed. I didn't restrict your movements, and since this forest is veiled in a barrier, I simply came to see what you two were up to, Inurai replied directly. But judging by what's in front of me, your actions might have been a little too much. Tuko adjusted her glasses, ready to explain. Wait, teacher. We were just... Don't bother, Tuko, Shiomi said in a low voice. Look around. Where's the wreckage of the automata? That shut Tuko up. She was genuinely stunned. Earlier, on her way here, she had clearly seen the scattered remains of automata nearby. But now, there was nothing. Not a trace. It was as if the nameless girl had never been here at all. And Inurai had no idea she ever had. A dagger through the throat. Quick and clean. Not really a Magus' style, but definitely something a sealing designation executor would do, Inurai said as she slowly stepped forward, looking at the Princess of Silver lying in the spring. So, this is what you call being caught red-handed? Shiomi raised his hand. The golden dagger was still in his grip, stained with blood. Whether it was the Princess of Silver's blood or not was something any Magus could easily determine. No, that's exactly why I have to question it, Inurai said, her expression like ice. If the Princess of Gold's death was still within the bounds of suspicion, then here. With the Princess of Silver dead, and you standing at the scene holding the murder weapon. She gave a faint smile, but it carried no warmth. And all this while my own student was shadowing you. Not to mention. This was a forest enclosed by a barrier, where every action was being monitored. A scene this sloppily staged, this blatant, only made Inurai's suspicion pivot in the opposite direction. So, the truth's starting to show itself? Tuko took out a fresh cigarette, lit it, and inhaled deeply. Inurai nodded at her thought. That's right. At this point, there's no doubt. Someone is trying to remove Shiomi from Valuala, to weaken them from within. Chapter 133, Following the death of the Princess of Gold, the Princess of Silver was also found dead in the forest of Izlama. Upon hearing the news, Karina, one of the twin maids, collapsed to the ground, unable to move. The task of tending to the Princess of Silver's body fell to her sister, Regina. Though they were twins, the two sisters displayed completely different levels of composure when faced with the deaths of the mistresses they served. Shiomi couldn't help but think. Twins really are different, after all. Looking back, it was grimly ironic. Just the night before, the Princess of Gold had wanted to escape with her sister. The next day, both were dead within hours of each other. A situation too miserable to even laugh at, said Rains. Due to financial constraints, she hadn't been able to return immediately after attending the social gathering and ended up staying overnight in Izlama's Tower of the Sunday. Shiomi glanced up slightly at Rains, whose lips curled in a smile. You talk like you care, but you're grinning more than anyone. Not quite, Rains said with a teasing smile. I'm just amused that the always composed Shiomi-sensei could get caught up in something this messy. I'm very curious to see how you'll get out of this. It doesn't exactly count as a predicament, Shiomi sighed. The sudden deaths of the current generation's Princess of Gold and Princess of Silver meant that Izlama's painstaking achievements in magecraft had been undone in an instant. In light of that, Byron Valuala Izlama nearly lost his composure, intent on holding Shiomi accountable and sending him to the clock tower to be judged by the Department of Policies. In the world of Magi, not only murder but also the destruction of a generation's magical legacy was a grave crime. Especially when the family in question wasn't some third-rate lineage. Yet with Lord Valuala personally guaranteeing Shiomi's safety, Byron had no choice but to hold back. Shiomi remained the prime suspect, And perhaps it was precisely because the suspicion fell so squarely on him that Inurai had taken a conservative stance, opting to wait rather than act. For now, Shiomi was simply confined to his room and forbidden from leaving. As for the potential murder weapon, erosion, he had publicly sealed it inside a crystal and placed it in his room for all to see. Besides Karin and Gray, Rains had also come by to visit. Hence her commentary just now. But how did it happen? Gray asked, clearly puzzled. Sensei said he fought only automata in the forest. So why was the Princess of Silver's blood on his dagger? Karin shook her head. I know you enjoy detective stories, but for Magi, the how often doesn't matter. The more skilled the magus, the more outrageous the means they can use to kill. As for transferring wounds. As she spoke, she reached out and took Gray's hand. After exposing both their forearms, Karin released her and, without warning, poked her own arm with a pen from the table. Ow! Gray winced in pain. Karin's arm remained completely unharmed. No dent, no mark. But a faint bloody line appeared on Gray's arm. With just that brief touch, Karin had used a spell to connect herself to Gray and transfer the damage to her. Of course, for more severe injuries, the ritual would need to be more complex and take more time. In other words, among the automata that Shiomi and Tako had fought in the forest, at least one had been altered with a damage-transferring spell. Automata won't stop unless dealt a fatal blow. So Shiomi had no choice. He had to strike with precision to neutralize them. Erosion wasn't just a mystic code on the level of a noble phantasm, it was also an exceptional magical medium. In the 2 or 3 months since returning from Blackmore Village, Shiomi had already came to rely on the dagger as a dependable magical weapon. To stab through an automaton's neck or heart and render it immobile was nothing to him. But that was exactly what led him into the trap. If one of the automata had been linked to the Princess of Silver through a wound-transferring spell, then even Shiomi, unable to distinguish it, would inevitably kill her amid the chaos, whether with erosion or by some other means. So, for this plan to work, someone had to have access to both the Princess of Silver and the automata in the forest, Karin said. But now, all traces of the automata had vanished. Most likely the handiwork of that nameless girl. Her interference was practically cheating, leaving even Shiomi at a complete loss. Karin continued her analysis. Whether it's the automata or the Princess of Silver, both belong to Izuma. And the only ones who could have had access to both. Rain snapped her fingers. Obviously, someone from the Izuma family. But that raises 2 big questions, Gray added nervously. Who did it? And why? Shiomi gave a helpless laugh. If the answer could be reached just by discussing it here with you, I wouldn't be locked up in this room, cooperating with an investigation over a frame-up. Then we should go investigate, Karin said. Why are there so many guests still staying here? And why, of all people, did the blame conveniently fall on you, father? Shiomi was, by any logic, one of the least likely people to be framed. Same with Tuko Ozaki. In contrast, younger girls would have been far easier scapegoats. Shiomi fell silent. He was certain this was all part of a play orchestrated by the nameless girl. But the one always pulling the strings from behind the curtain would never step into the spotlight to join the performance. Which meant someone else, perhaps without realizing it, had been manipulated, steered towards setting up this entire sequence of events for some hidden agenda. But Sensei can't go outside, right? Rain said, then suddenly caught on. Wait. Karin, don't tell me you're planning to. Karin raised a finger to her lips. Empty eyes, empty thoughts, empty hands. And that's exactly why we must open our hollow eyes as wide as we can, work our vacant minds as hard as we can. And even if we can't grasp anything, we must still reach out with our hands. Karin. Gray murmured softly. Karin rose from her seat. Father's always been the one taking care of us. Just this once, let me switch roles and do what I can to support him. Honestly, I don't think things are very safe right now. Don't act recklessly, Shiomi warned. This body bears the rune you engraved, father. It won't fall so easily, Karin said with a smile. Shiomi gave a nod. There were still too many things he didn't know. He needed to find a way to uncover the deeper motives behind the other's presence here. Just like his own. Chapter 134, The sunset vanished without warning. Shiomi, passing time reading in his room while waiting for the situation to evolve, noticed the evening sky suddenly dimming. Before the sun could be completely swallowed by the clouds drifting in from the east, what caught his attention first was the overwhelming number of small magical sources approaching. Magi. Around 20. No, 30 of them. He closed the book in his hands. Being framed as a murderer didn't particularly rattle him. His plan was simple. Cooperate for now, wait until the real culprit got frustrated at his persistence and slipped up, then act. But for an army of magi to appear just as Islama's generation of magical achievements was being snuffed out one after another, that couldn't be a coincidence. These people were coming regardless of the murders. Rising from the sofa, he moved to the window. In mere moments, dark clouds had swept over the land surrounding Islama's lakeside estate. A deep rumble of thunder echoed across the sky. Then lightning tore through the clouds, slamming into the forest, its flash illuminating the darkened air in a sudden blaze of brilliance. A weather-based magecraft launched precisely at dusk, clearly meant to sever Islama's connection to its land. When the land was damaged, the mana flow from the ley lines became more unstable than usual. Under normal circumstances, magi guarding their territory would reinforce the land with defensive magecraft. Naturally, the attackers would begin by disrupting those defenses. Would Islama simply sit back and wait to be crushed? Just as Shiomi pondered this, a knock came at the door. When it opened slowly, Lady Inarai, dressed in her signature green gown, stood there. Lady Inarai? Shiomi greeted her with a smile. Now's hardly the time to be calling me in for questioning, is it? No. I figured you wouldn't be able to sit still. After all, your daughter went to check the perimeter of the forest, Inarai replied calmly, the look on her face one of complete control. I've come to lift your house arrest. Judging by your tone, you already know who's behind this attack on Islma? Shiomi stepped toward the door. The moment he learned Karin was near the forest, there was no way he could stay still. The Galyasta family, Inarai said as she turned and began walking away. Shiomi's brow twitched. Galyasta. He'd heard the name before. A newly emerged Magus family from the Middle East, descended from oil tycoons. Backed by vast wealth, they specialized in seizing the achievements of others, even other magi. So they'd set their sights on the current generation of Islama's magical accomplishments. And launched an assault? Shiomi exited the Tower of the Sun and made his way toward the edge of the forest. Rain had already begun to fall, a heavy downpour slamming against the earth and soaking the entire Windermere Lake district. Weather-altering magecraft on this scale was immense, but not unheard of. Rain-making rituals, or those like it, had long circulated across cultures worldwide. Yet for modern magi, executing such a feat was far from easy. One major obstacle, the fading of mysteries. The reason this invading force of magi could pull it off was simple. They were exploiting the terrain. Islama's twin towers stood in a region notorious for its volatile weather. The natural conditions already lent themselves to climatic shifts, magecraft merely accelerated the process. Several kilometers away, perched on a slope overlooking Islama's lands, a young man watched with pride. Etram Galyasta, the newly appointed head of the Garista family, clung to a scantily clad maid, whispering smug boasts of his success into her ear. The spellwork had been of his own design. The surprise attack was being carried out by over a dozen magi from his family, all following his lead. Come, plunder. Usurp. Do it efficiently. Atram laughed heartily as he declared war, but his voice abruptly cut off, the final word hanging unfinished. Begin. A light flared near the twin towers. Unlike the sharpness of lightning, it resembled a lighthouse glimpsed by ships during a stormy night at sea. The light shot swiftly into the sky, vanishing into the dense clouds above. In an instant, the rain ceased, the storm clouds scattered, and the sunset with its crimson sky returned. Etram raised the antique telescope in his hand to see who had done it. The shock in his heart quickly gave way to fury. He unconsciously tightened his grip on the maid at his side, leaving red marks on her flawless, wheat-toned skin. The ninth of the primordial runes, the rune of seafaring. Originally used to calm the seas during violent storms, its true essence lay in the complete control over weather. Not only could it pacify wind and wave, but also conjure tidal forces powerful enough to level a city. The forest, once capable of forming barriers, now stood bare and exposed after the damage to its land. Bathed in the evening glow, it was little more than a pristine nature reserve. Islama is under my control. Do whatever you want with the attackers, that was the last thing Inarai said to Shiomi before leaving. Whether it was to make someone else do the dirty work, or to confirm something, Shiomi didn't really care. In his field of vision, he already saw the Magi squad confronting Karin and the others. They were the vanguard of the Magus army that had assaulted Islama. Without exception, they wore green hoods and cloaks, concealing both their bodies and faces. Like a demonic army from ages past. Just moments ago, they had been riding high on the weather support from their allies behind them. Now, they were thrown into bewilderment. Several of them already lay on the ground, pierced by glowing mana arrows. Leave this to me. What's coming next isn't something you can handle, Shiomi said, placing a hand on Karin's shoulder. She gripped two-hand crossbows etched with rune script. Weapons Shiomi had prepared for her self-defense. Unable to wield offensive magecraft effectively, Karin relied on magical tools to support her attacks. The crossbows fired arrows whose power adapted to the user's intent. The embedded spellwork automatically converted ambient mana to fuel them. To put it simply, they were like automatic pistols with perfect accuracy. Just earlier, Karin's group had encountered an advancing Magus squad. With Grey spearheading the front and her and Rains supporting from the rear, they managed to stop several enemies. The torrential rain created by Magecraft had heavily disrupted their movements. But just as quickly, that interference vanished. When I saw the rain stop, I knew Father had arrived. Karin lowered her crossbow. We're pulling back for now. With that, she retreated behind Shiomi, taking Rains and Grey with her. Shiomi now stood alone in the forest, facing the Magi hidden among the trees. Chapter 135. None of the attackers dared to act recklessly. The coordinated weather Magecraft cast by their comrades had been unraveled in an instant. All of them felt the extraordinary mana radiating from the light that had just risen. Could Aislma also possess a spell of such scale capable of controlling the weather? That thought ran through the minds of several attackers. Honestly, I'm pretty pissed right now, Shiomi said, brushing back his hair. I was planning to see what kind of game Valuala was playing, and then you people show up and pull this stunt. Nouveau riche are still nouveau riche. Leopards don't change their spots. As he ran his hand through his hair, Shiomi's rain-soaked body and clothes dried in the blink of an eye, as if he'd never been caught in the storm at all. But that wasn't what drew their attention. One after another, glowing rune characters began to materialize in the forest, floating midair. Rune Magecraft. Every one of them had at least basic Magus training, and they could instantly recognize the nature of this magic. You're not worth my time. Send your leader. Shiomi lowered his hand and spoke with a cold detachment, as if already looking at corpses. The rune symbols flared with blinding brilliance. Screams erupted from the attackers, and those with quicker reflexes scrambled to cast defensive spells. Modern rune Magecraft had long declined. Although Tuko Ozaki had reconstructed the system, even deciphering several lost primordial runes, those reconstructed ones were now patented by the clock tower and sealed away. And the revived techniques had only resurfaced in the last decade or two. Magus who had truly mastered them were exceedingly rare. So, when the floating runes activated on their own, most of the Magus in the vanguard hadn't been on high alert. They figured their opponent was just one person, wielding an outdated and obscure system like rune Magecraft. Nothing to fear. That assumption quickly got them killed. Magus after Magus fell one by one. Those who hadn't underestimated their enemy managed to block most of the damage with protective spells, but even they were left in a miserable state. They collapsed into the thick underbrush, hidden beneath the greenery. Ignoring their groans, Shiomi stepped forward, slowly making his way deeper into the forest. Toward the location, several kilometers away, where the weather Magecraft had originated. But as the vanguard unit, these attackers weren't going to surrender that easily. The still conscious Magus leaned against tree trunks, preparing to cast thunder spells. Without the weather support from their allies in the rear, these spells reverted to their base power, no longer enhanced by the previous amplification. Still, with enough attackers, they might be able to wound the strange Magus standing before them. Didn't I already say you're not up to the task? Shiomi raised his hand. Before the lightning, fire, and ice arrows formed by mana could even be released, a strange wind swept through the forest. It whipped at the Magus' hoods and cloaks with an eerie intensity. Before they could even grasp what was happening, the flow of their mana was violently disrupted, followed by a wave of searing pain. The arms used to cast spells, those embedded with magic circuits, were severed at the root. Blood sprayed through the forest, staining the green bushes and leaves a vivid red. Cries of agony rang out, but Shiomi didn't even flinch. He simply watched as a young man with blonde hair and brown skin stepped from the shadows between the trees. My, what a spectacle. I never thought Aislma would hire such a powerful bodyguard, Etrim said, his tone mockingly polite. Even the weather Magecraft I personally designed was broken in an instant. Is that catalyst really so precious to you? Though his words feigned admiration, his clenched teeth and bloodthirsty gaze betrayed the rage simmering beneath the surface. As if he were ready to tear apart anyone standing in his way. A curse. Oh. Shiomi let out a quiet sound of realization. He had initially assumed these attackers were linked to those who killed the Princess of Gold and Princess of Silver. But in fact, it was the opposite. So, Galliasta was the rival who had his auction item snatched away by Aislma at that underground auction. In hindsight, it seemed Aislma had picked the wrong opponent to provoke. You're not one of Aislma's hired Magus, are you? Etrim quickly deduced Shiomi's stance from those few words. Why not lend me a hand instead? Galliast is willing to pay even more. To someone like you, noble slayer of the clock tower. Etrim had already identified Shiomi from the intelligence he'd gathered, so he made no effort to hide his recruitment attempt. You brought this many people to seize the catalyst. Aiming to take part in the upcoming Fifth Holy Grail War, right? Shiomi asked. Naturally. That's why I'd be honored to invite you, Mr. Shiomi. A seasoned veteran of the Holy Grail War. To join us, Atrim replied, his tone coated in false politeness. Shiomi remained indifferent. So that means you'll be Sakura's enemy. That won't do. Sakura could probably handle this group, but their sheer numbers made the situation dangerous. If she underestimated them or reacted poorly due to her lack of battlefield experience, she could face serious consequences in the Holy Grail War. This, however, was the perfect opportunity. What? Atrim caught the rising wave of bloodlust in the air. He sensed a shift in Shiomi's demeanor. My apologies. But since the time, place, and circumstances are all just right, please die here, Mr. Galliesta. Shiomi raised his hand, and the sky that had just cleared was once again swallowed by dark clouds. Atrim's expression twisted. It wasn't the Megaseed stationed in the rear who had restored the spell. Someone else was altering the weather. Could it be those same Magus who had dismantled the previous weather spell? That thought excited Atrim, and the Magus behind him stirred in anticipation, awaiting their master's command. Wonderful. Just wonderful. Death, death, death. As expected of the infamous noble slayer. You kill nobles indiscriminately, don't you? Atrim feigned admiration, but a vulgar grin tugged at the corner of his lips. He didn't take Shiomi's declaration of death seriously at all. So what if the vanguard was repelled? Atrim was confident that not even a Lord of the Clock Tower could stop the elite Magus army he had so carefully prepared. Unlike those willing to gamble their lives, Atrim favored clean, overwhelming victories. He had already spoken with Lord Valuala stationed here. The Lord had told him, do as you please, which gave Atrim the boldness to attack Valuala with no restraint. From the pocket of his immaculate suit, Atrim took out a small, flask-like object. You know what this is? This is a primeval battery. A Magus with no lineage or connections like you wouldn't understand its history. Or its value, would you? Chapter 136, Primeval Battery. The world's oldest battery was unearthed in the Kara-Antip ruins, on the outskirts of the Middle East. It's widely believed that its creator didn't truly understand its principles. Perhaps it was made by chance, merely as a gilding tool. Yet this same structure was passed down through generations of Magus, developing along a path utterly separate from science. When one of the Magus families studying the primeval battery fell into decline, Galliesta bought both the battery and its legacy with money. Specializing in Ormagecraft and Price Magecraft, Galliesta found the primeval battery exceptionally convenient. With it, they mastered natural phenomena once seen as divine power and heavenly thunder across the world, ushering in a golden age for their family. They even adapted the technique to manipulate the weather. Gush out. As Atrim spoke, electricity surged into the form of a giant hand and lunged at Shiomi faster than the blink of an eye. Fighting lightning with lightning, Shiomi countered with the same element. A bolt of blue lightning tore through the rain, intercepting the golden hand. Two powerful magecrafts, both brimming with mana, collided. Only a stronger mistray can overwhelm another. The clashing bolts exploded into a mana-charged shockwave, scattering raindrops into a spiraling vortex before fading together into the downpour. That's impressive, Atrim muttered through clenched teeth. Shiomi brushed the raindrops from his bangs. I should be the one saying that. The spell fueled by the primeval battery had performed better than expected, powerful enough to cancel out ordinary magecraft. If that's all your precious primeval battery can do, you're dead. Shiomi lowered his hand and stared at Atrim with cold indifference. The calm tone struck as a sharp provocation, bruising Atrim's pride. No one had ever dared speak to him that way. Born into privilege, no one. Not his parents, siblings, or clansmen. Had ever shown such blatant disrespect to the Galliesta family. His eyes widened in fury. Burning with rage, he conjured mana several times stronger than before, activating his magic crest and pouring it into the primeval battery's spell. The magecraft Galliesta had acquired converted that mana with perfect efficiency into thunder in the shape of a dragon. Everyone there saw it, a massive dragon bearing its fangs, giving Shiomi no room to retreat, ready to tear him apart. Shiomi saw it too. And the smug curl of Atrim's lips. How capable Atrim was as a magus was hard to say. But this ruthless, practiced spellcasting spoke of hard-earned combat experience. Guess I'll take this a bit more seriously, Shiomi thought. Normally, he would only use Grand Magecraft in a fight against a servant. Thunder rain. With those brief words, lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the storm-darkened lake as if it were midday. In that instant, Atrim realized. He had gravely underestimated his opponent. He'd missed so much. From breaking the cooperative magecraft of multiple magus to altering the weather instantly and slipping control from his army's grasp. All of it had been the work of one man, Denkai Shiomi. And most of all, not a single word of chant. That was a feat only possible in a time long before the Common Era, when the Age of God still thrived and humanity lived entwined with magecraft. In other words, from the beginning, Denkai Shiomi had been using Age of God's magecraft. It was irrational. Impossible. Atram might boast to his maids and subordinates that the magecraft he used in the assault on Islama Forest rivaled Medea, the Witch of Colchis. But he knew better than anyone. This was on a whole other level. Not even a short chance spell could bridge that kind of power gap, let alone something that rivaled a military airstrike. Precisely because he was a skilled magus, he could recognize the danger instantly. But it was already too late. Blue lightning swallowed Atram's spell with ease, absorbed it, and surged into the forest. The cries that followed were drowned by the roar of grand magecraft. Then came the explosion. The torrential rain was slashed away by a violent gust, only returning to the earth a few seconds later. Ugh! Maybe I went a little overboard. Shiomi looked at Atram. His body charred black and torn, barely clinging to life as he leaned against a broken tree, struggling to breathe. Each breath made Atram feel death creeping ever closer. The slow crunch of footsteps through the muddy grass sounded, to him, like the Grim Reaper drawing near. He stared at Shiomi, terrified and confused, unable to comprehend how such a monster could exist in this world. He used to think the previous lord, El Meloi, had died in Fuiuki just because he took things too lightly. Now, Atram realized he had misunderstood the cause and effect entirely. I know about the primeval battery. It's definitely ancient. Shiomi crouched in front of Atram. But the rune magecraft I use is older than anything you've ever known. When it comes to mystery, you are already outmatched. Even so, getting results like this from just one rune. Isn't that a bit much? At that moment, Tuko Ozaki's voice came from behind. Primordial runes are miracles of that caliber. You know that better than anyone. Shiomi stood up, ignoring the near corpse that Atram had become, and turned to face Tuko. Did Lady Inarai send you to tell me not to kill him? You're a little late. At this point, not even the clock tower's best magus could save him. Even if he could be saved, the near-total destruction of his magic circuits and magic crest spelled the end of Atram's career as a magus. Tuko slowly removed her glasses and looked at Shiomi with a bright, cheerful expression. Fighting someone like him wasn't much, was it? There's no reason for me to fight you. Shiomi frowned. He had never considered Tuko an enemy. And she had never treated him as one either. I don't want to fight you either, but I don't have a choice, Tuko said. For the same reason you don't. That nameless girl. Shiomi clicked his tongue in frustration. He had no idea what sort of deal Tuko had made with her. As fellow rune magicians, let's call this a friendly match. Tuko, rarely seen like this, seemed eager for a fight. Seriously. This world is always soaked in blood. Even you're taking a swing at me now. As the words left his mouth, glowing rune characters lit up in the air around them. Chapter 137, I lost in the end, huh? Tuko, slung lazily over Shiomi's back, sighed. She was filthy too, but definitely in better shape than Atram, who was left to await death. She looked more like someone who had just rolled around in the mud on a rainy day. If I'd let you win, I might as well crawl back to my old master now, Shiomi muttered. Besides, your outfit was way too bare. You didn't bring anything at all. As expected, their match had ended in Tuko's defeat. Since their duel was meant to be a rune magecraft contest from the start, Tuko hadn't brought any familiars or mystic codes. The only familiar that might have helped wouldn't appear unless Tuko died. Of course, she knew full well that the creature sealed in her box couldn't do anything against Shiomi. Bringing it would have made no difference. Tuko pushed her glasses up. Still, experiencing it firsthand wasn't enough to grasp the essence of the primordial runes. Shiomi pursed his lips and stated plainly, we both base our magecraft on runes, but we're not using the same foundation. Magecraft functions by channeling mana through a thaumaturgical foundation to trigger supernatural phenomena. In theory, a foundation can even be improvised on the spot. But in such cases, the performance would be affected by a range of variable factors. Using her genius, Tuko reconstructed the decaying rune system and sold it to the clock tower. These days, rune magecraft is so widespread there that most magi can perform at least the basic techniques. But Shiomi was different. The foundation he used for his rune magecraft was tied to a far older mystery. If I'm right, it's the foundation first discovered by Odin himself, Tuko said, her innate talent and sharp instincts letting her see its true nature clearly. I can't believe you actually got your hands on something like that. Wouldn't go that far, Shiomi replied vaguely. He trudged forward through the forest, uneven terrain underfoot. The Twin Towers was still out of sight. There was more walking to do. I should have brought you along when I went back to Misaki, Tuko said, resting on his shoulder and speaking idly by his ear. She had fought with everything she had. So had Shiomi. but the gap in their foundations ensured Tuko's defeat. If he hadn't held back, her body would have ended up just like Atram's. We didn't even know each other back then, Shiomi said, exasperated. Besides, going up against a magician who inherited the fifth magic? Win or lose, it wouldn't have ended well for me. If he lost, who knew what kind of curse Oko Ozaki might have thrown his way? Tuko had already been hit with one, return to Misaki City and she'd turn into a frog. And if he won? That would be an even bigger problem. A magus defeating a magician would shake the entire magical world. And draw the attention of the other still living magicians. That was a risk with no reward. Shiomi just wanted to quietly continue his deep dive into what his master had passed down to him. Even now, he hadn't fully grasped the power of the 18 primordial runes discovered by Odin. Every time he came up with a new idea, the system would naturally unfold further, as if it had no end. As for the true power of the final primordial rune, Shiomi still had no idea. You actually thought you could win? Tuko smiled. Not mocking Shiomi's reaction, just amused. So, what did that mysterious girl promise you? What made you jump in at a time like this? Shiomi asked. The foundation of the primordial runes, Tuko replied bluntly. Whether it was true or not didn't matter, the girl had told her to challenge Shiomi, and either way, she had nothing to lose. Normally, Shiomi would never agree to a fight with Tuko. Not even a friendly one. Unless forced by circumstance. Apparently, that nameless girl had given him just the kind of push he couldn't ignore. Seriously. You're the textbook definition of a magus, Shiomi said, exasperated. So obsessed it's almost impressive. At its core, magecraft is obsession. It's about turning yourself into a cog in the machinery of mystery, Tuko said matter-of-factly. Still, if any of my old classmates saw me now, they'd say I've completely lost my way. They're all dead. If they could see you, that'd be a whole different problem, Shiomi muttered. He kept walking, then came to a sudden stop. There are actually two others who share the same rune foundation as me, Shiomi said. Let me guess. Your two daughters? Tuko didn't seem the least bit surprised. Shiomi said, the one who taught me the primordial runes didn't set any conditions. It was like she handed them to me and said, do whatever you want with these. Don't tell me you're thinking of giving me that foundation, Tuko said, feeling that she was already pretty free-spirited. But Shiomi clearly took it to another level. If you don't want it, forget it, Shiomi said as he started walking again. It was just a whim. That's kind of a heavy gift to accept on the spot. Let me think it over. For once, Tuko wasn't entirely composed. Somewhere in the lineage of Magi, something buried deep. A reaction to touching the core of mystery had begun to stir inside her. Excitement. Anticipation. Whatever. Your call, Shiomi said without concern. That reminds me. What was Atram Galliasta trying to steal from Izuma? I forgot to ask. Feels weird to go back now just to check. Oh. Tuko's voice took on a note of dry surprise. So you didn't even know why he came after you? You just killed him. Lady Inurai didn't tell me not to, so I figured it was fine, Shiomi said with a chuckle. Tuko nodded in agreement, then explained, Galliasta was after a blood-stained body leaf that Izuma recently picked up at an auction. A body leaf? Blood-stained. Wait. Don't tell me. The one that blocked Siegfried's back when he bathed in dragon blood? Exactly, Tuko confirmed. How do you even know that? Izuma never made it public, right? Because that was my reward, Tuko continued. I came to Izuma for a social event, but I was actually working a commission for them. It was definitely a significant deal. Something that should have been kept under wraps. But compared to what Shiomi had offered her on a whim, Tuko figured telling him this much was no big deal. Chapter 138, Inside the Walled Workshop, alongside essentials like the Philosopher's Egg and distillers, were countless materials and tools specific to Izuma's magecraft. At that moment, Byron Valuala Izuma stood within, using a magical reagent to destroy something. The items tossed into the fireplace burned slowly in flames imbued with magical energy. Izuma's magecraft prized aesthetic expression, and as a result, often fell short in more practical applications. Even an act as straightforward as destroying materials required the help of magical potions. Only then could one ensure the remains couldn't be reconstructed, even by the most skilled magus. How impatient. A voice spoke behind him, prompting Byron to whirl around. Tenkai Shiomi stood at the workshop doorway, a gentle smile on his lips. Mr. Shiomi, this is Izuma's magical workshop. You shouldn't just barge in like this, Byron said, quickly regaining his composure as he stood to rebuke the intrusion. Generally speaking, no, a guest shouldn't be this rude, Shiomi replied, unfazed. But I don't think our relationship is as simple as host and guest, is it? Byron's expression stiffened. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, Mr. Shiomi. Right now, I'm under suspicion for killing your two daughters. The Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver, Shiomi said as he slowly approached. Ordinarily, a workshop was a Magus's home base. A fortress by nature. Any reckless intruder would meet with fierce resistance, regardless of who they were. That's how it should have been. But though Byron clutched his cane, he didn't dare to move. Had this happened before the Galliasta forces attacked, he might have responded decisively. But now, after Shiomi single-handedly crushed the Galliasta Magus army, after Ratram Galliasta had fallen in battle, after Byron had watched everything from within the Twin Towers, he knew the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. Shiomi walked past him, crouched at the fireplace, and pulled out a half-burned document. Runes encircled the surviving parchment, rapidly restoring it before his eyes. Restorative rune magecraft. Oh. A damage-transferring curse. Used on the right target, it could even shift fatal wounds. Normally, a spell like this is too dangerous. There's no way to control where the damage goes, Shiomi remarked. But if you bind it to an automata, surprisingly, it works perfectly. He turned his head toward Byron. And that detail alone feels completely out of character for Islama's magecraft. All this setup must have taken quite the effort. Just to frame me, and cover up the truth about Islama. Why would I frame you for something like this? Byron, still composed, asked in indignation. Because Lord Valuala found it odd. How Islama's long stagnant research suddenly made a leap forward. But she couldn't investigate it through internal channels, so she sent me to this little social gathering to look into it discreetly, Shiomi said, meeting Byron's gaze. That alone should have put you on alert, don't you think? Byron was speechless. As he had suspected all along, Shiomi had came to this event with a hidden agenda. Well then, care to explain, Byron? At some point, Inarai had appeared at the workshop entrance. Her voice was flat and emotionless. Later, in the hall of the Tower of the Moon, the remaining guests, along with Islama's twin maids who had served the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver, had all gathered. I won't deny it. When I accepted Islama's invitation to attend the debut of the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver, I didn't come with pure intentions, Shiomi declared in front of everyone. The reason's simple. Before Islama even decided to host this gathering, Lord Valuala came to see me. He glanced toward Lady Inarai. She had already given silent approval for him to reveal the truth. From this moment, the incident had fully turned into a scandal. Even if Inarai chose to cover it up for Valuala's sake, it would inevitably put Shiomi at odds with the Democratic faction. A rising magus whose potential rivaled even the current Marshal of Magecraft, Lorelei Bardem Eloy. Someone like that couldn't be allowed to fall into the hands of the opposition, even if they couldn't be fully brought under control. The reason he came to me is simple. Although Islama's research had been progressing steadily, by Lady Inarai's estimate, it should have taken several more generations before reaching any breakthroughs. But not long ago, Islama suddenly claimed to have made dramatic progress, Shiomi said, arms crossed as he coolly eyed Byron seated among the crowd. Such an unexpected leap. Lady Inarai wasn't going to take it at face value. But launching a formal investigation would have caused unrest within the faction. So, she devised another approach. That approach was to send Tenkai Shiomi. The rest might not have known, but Lord Valuala was well aware. No one was more suited to working behind the scenes and uncovering the truth than Shiomi. That was why he had accepted the invitation to the social gathering in the first place. But for some reason, this supposedly top-secret matter made its way to Mr. Byron, Shiomi added, turning to Lady Inarai with open suspicion. Yet Inarai remained composed as she responded, I didn't leak a word. I didn't even discuss it within Valuala before your investigation yielded results. Shiomi raised an eyebrow. The answer clicked into place in his mind. He didn't press further and continued, shortly before this gathering began, the Princess of Gold died during a shaping adjustment due to flaws in Islama's technique. In other words, by the time she was found this morning, she'd already been dead for several days. For a magus, applying basic preservation magecraft was a trivial task. And for a necromancer, even making a year's dead corpse appear lifelike was within reach. As he finished speaking, Corin entered the hall, holding something wrapped in a blanket. With calm precision, she laid it down and opened it. Many in the room immediately turned pale. The dismembered Princess of Gold. Her face still flawless. Exuded a bloody, tragic beauty too terrible to behold. Chapter 139, unlike the state she was found in that morning. Dismembered and horrifying. The Princess of Gold's body had now been fully reassembled. Yet every joint was lined with rune-marked seams. Even if preservation and time concealment magecraft were applied, once the body is restored and runes are inscribed on the deceased, it's possible to determine the exact time of death, Karin said, crouched beside the Princess of Gold's remains. If necessary. We could even make her speak. Conversation with the dead, Lady Inarai murmured. No wonder you went this far. She knew the spell. As long as the caster wasn't the one who killed the deceased, the spell could be used to question the dead. The timing and integrity of the corpse would determine how much could be asked. That was exactly why Karan had helped reconstruct the Princess of Gold's body through Midcraft. But since the Princess of Gold was already dead, Byron needed to do more than hide that fact. He needed to drag me, the one sent to verify Islama's supposed achievements, into it too, Shiomi said. So he devised a plan to make me the first person to witness her corpse. But even that wasn't enough. So you did something even crueler. He had killed his other daughter, the Princess of Silver. The second half of Islama's achievement. Of course, you didn't kill her right away. You approached her like any other day, caught her off guard, knocked her out, and placed her in the forest's spring. Then you linked her to one of Islama's automata using a curse that transferred damage, Shiomi continued, anger flashing in his eyes. As for when? Probably last night, around the time the Princess of Gold came to see me. His fury wasn't over being framed. It was at Byron, who as a father, was willing to sacrifice his own daughters for personal gain. If Islama's falsified results were confirmed by Shiomi and reported to Inarai, their future in Valuala, and their pursuit of the root, would be thrown into doubt. For a research-focused magus to fabricate results at such a critical stage would be a scandal serious enough to shake the very foundations of Valuala. So instead, he destroyed the data from the start and pinned everything on someone guaranteed to interact with both princesses. As for a motive? That could be pinned on the aristocratic faction later, turning the whole thing into a political mess. But that still leaves one problem, Rain spoke up. Who exactly was the Princess of Gold who showed up at the social gathering? You can't fake something like that, can you? Oh, it's possible. After all, isn't there someone here who specializes in transforming the human body? Shiomi turned to Tuko. Until just recently, I thought you came purely out of interest in Islama's research. Tuko, for once, looked faintly apologetic. She hadn't been able to explain the crucial point in time, which was why Shiomi had remained silent when he was framed. Waiting for the situation to evolve. But trust is fragile. It doesn't take much to shake it. Still, Tuko had always planned to talk with Shiomi once everything was over. Seeing him being set up, she had already begun to consider revealing her real reason for coming. The thaumaturgical foundation of the primordial runes was a weighty enough revelation to tip the entire balance. With Tuko's confession, Shiomi finally placed the last missing piece in the puzzle. Islama had faked their results. And Byron's fury. His calculated calm even after the deaths of his daughters. Only solidified Shiomi's conclusion. The only thing left unanswered had been the mystery of the Princess of Gold who appeared at the gathering. So then, what exactly? Rains pressed on, brimming with curiosity. Shiomi suddenly raised his hand and pointed to the ceiling. Everyone instinctively followed his gesture and looked up. A moment later, a thunderclap roared out. So deafening it seemed to shake even the Twin Towers itself, as if the heavens were collapsing. Caught completely off guard, even magi as powerful as Lady Inarai and Tuko had to cover their ears to shield themselves from the blast's physical force. But amid the chaos, one person reacted a beat too late. You can feel the tremors. But you can't hear the thunder, can you, Ms. Karina? Shiomi slowly lowered his hand. Outside, the downpour hadn't let up. His weather-based magecraft was still in effect, allowing him to influence any part of the lake region at will. For instance, he could summon thunder. Harmless in substance but overwhelming in force, enough to rattle even top-tier magi. You've lost your hearing, just like the Princess of Gold you served, Shiomi said, stepping up to Karina. And more than that. Perhaps from a very young age, you were attuned to her wavelength. Maybe it was a requirement of Islama's ritual formula, but that attunement also made you the perfect candidate to temporarily take her place. From there, all it took was a subtle transformation. One no one could detect. Some careful adjustments, and the right catalyst. That would be enough to reconstruct the Princess of Gold's appearance, using Karina as the base. And no, it wasn't a lie when you came to me last night, asking for help to escape. But after you and your sister returned, you realized the crucial piece. Princess of Silver was missing. That's when your plan fell apart. Which explained why Karina, unable to locate Princess of Silver and unwilling to raise suspicion, had been so devastated when she later witnessed her death. So much so that she nearly fainted. Maybe, at that moment, she even believed it was her desire to run away that had gotten the princess killed. Shiomi turned his gaze away, fixing it sharply on Byron Valuala Islama. Because at that very moment, the Princess of Silver, left alone in her room, met with her father. Completely unaware of his true intentions. She had become a sacrifice to protect her father's status and preserve Islama's prestige. Well then, I suppose my task here is done, Lady Inarai, Shiomi said, glancing toward her as she poured herself a glass of champagne. What happens next is up to Valuala. Whether you cast them out or handle it according to your own laws. It's your internal affair. He turned to leave. Next time, don't ask me for this kind of job. I'm much better at brawling than I am at digging up secrets. But you already stepped down from the ceiling designation unit, Inurai quipped. Fair point. Shiomi gave a faint, careless smile, then walked out of the hall, heading back to his room. Chapter 140, in the end, Islama's grandly publicized Magecraft exhibition turned into a full-blown scandal. With both fraud and murder on display during the event, the clock tower froze all of Islama's territory. But what really set the clock tower buzzing wasn't the blow dealt to the Democratic faction's Valuala. It was the sudden fall of the upstart Galliesta family's newly appointed head. The one responsible? Tenkai Shiomi. Only a handful had witnessed the battle firsthand, so as the story spread, it grew increasingly exaggerated. Eventually becoming one of the clock tower's enduring legends. Looks like that Noble Slayer nickname is going to stick, no matter what, Tuko remarked. If those magi had a shred of sense, they wouldn't believe nonsense like that, Shiomi replied. The two of them sat at an open-air cafe in front of Oxenholm Station, sharing a final coffee before parting ways. When Tuko teased him about the rumors, Shiomi could only sigh in exasperation. Still, you never exposed me, Tuko said. I guess I owe you for not damaging my reputation. She glanced at the smoking sign on the table, reached into her pocket for a cigarette. And found the case empty. Ah. Without a word, Shiomi pulled a golden, unopened cigarette pack from his bag and placed it in front of her. Take it, he said. Tuko looked at the box. You actually kept this? I remember I was short on money and said I'd pay you back with cigarettes. She'd just been bluffing. She really didn't have the cash at the time. I don't smoke, Shiomi said, leaning back with a shrug. Just used some moisture-proofing Magecraft. It'll last 10, maybe 20 years, no problem. I tend to hold on to things. Even though I've adapted pretty well at the clock tower, there aren't many people I can actually trust. Tuko tore open the wrapper with practiced ease, lit a cigarette, and took a slow draw. Makes me miss Tokyo. Then why did you leave? Shiomi raised a brow. You seemed comfortable enough. I thought you cared about how things would turn out for those two. Because no matter what, they'll end up together, Tuko said with a faint smile. She didn't explain further. Shiomi didn't need her to. Tuko Ozaki's attribute was wind. And like the wind, she never stayed in one place for long. He knew that well. In the end, we still didn't find the holy relic, Shiomi murmured, looking out past the cafe's fence. Beyond the stone-paved road, elegant carriages drawn by immaculate horses rolled off slowly into the distance. A Magus family like Galliesta would normally have to join the Democratic faction to rise within the clock tower, Tuko said. But the professor let you go after them. She had to know that if Atram Galliesta ran into you, he was finished. Call it a form of selection, Shiomi replied. I hate to admit it, but I've made quite a name for myself at the clock tower. There hadn't been any fighting yet. But that was only because Shiomi still played by the clock tower's rules. If they met on a battlefield outside its jurisdiction, he would become the most dangerous enemy imaginable. The fall of the previous Elmeloi had already proven that. And Shiomi wasn't worried about repeating history. From the moment that incident began, Atram had already disqualified himself as a Magus. Besides, the Galliesta family's methods were far too savage. Letting someone like that operate freely in the clock tower would have spelled trouble sooner or later. Inarai's silent approval for Shiomi to face him was likely a calculated move. A chance to eliminate a dangerous element under the guise of legitimacy. And since it was Galliesta who made the first move, the moment he started the conflict, he'd already staked his life as a Magus on the outcome. No wonder people say you're Lady Inarai's hidden blade, Tuko said with a teasing smile, her eyes narrowing slightly. When it comes to killing Magi, you might be more efficient than the so-called Magus killer. Maybe, Shiomi replied with a faint smile. But that guy's been retired for a while now. Probably spending his days playing house with his wife and kids. He may not have left the world of Magecraft entirely, but I'm sure it's more peaceful than being a Magus. What about you? Planning to keep stirring up trouble in the clock tower's faction wars? Tuko asked. I wouldn't call it stirring trouble. It just makes things easier for me, Shiomi mused. It's not that I need Valuala. It's that Valuala needs me. Let's not confuse the order. Considering even the professor's sand painting didn't work on you, I suppose you're right. The order does matter. Tuko nodded, accepting his words without question. She stubbed out her cigarette and handed the case back to Shiomi. Take it. I don't smoke. Just hang on to it for me. That way, the next time I see you, I can bum one off you, Shiomi said as Tuko picked up her suitcase. Just then, Shiomi noticed Karan and the others waiting across the street in a carriage. Alright then. He resealed the case and slipped it back into his bag. After settling the bill, they both walked to the roadside. Where to next? He asked. No idea. But I'll probably stay in the UK for a while, Tuko replied vaguely. She often traveled wherever whim carried her. I see. Then take care of yourself. Shiomi embraced her naturally. Tuko, as if used to it, returned the hug just as casually. You too. As for the primordial runes, I'll leave them to you. You've got the foundation already. With your talent, mastering the rest shouldn't be a problem. Shiomi spoke quietly. Let's make it a wager. Let's see who discovers it first. The true purpose of the primordial rune known only to Odin. Getting expectations from someone like you. That's real pressure, Tuko murmured, not pulling away as their cheeks brushed. After the brief hug, Shiomi crossed the street toward the carriage. Tuko strolled off at an unhurried pace, soon disappearing among the crowd. Her dull red hair faded into the sea of people, vanishing like the wind into the sky. Is father maybe a bit too close to that grand puppeteer? Karan said softly to Shiomi once he stepped into the carriage. Don't tell me you two used to be involved? Shiomi paused, then gave a troubled smile as memories surfaced. Maybe. Honestly, even I'm not sure if we were dating back then. And don't bother tattling. She already knows. TCH. Karan clicked her tongue in disappointment. Chapter 141, In the end, although the Valuala faction lost one of its most powerful families, Inurai had clearly anticipated it. Thanks to her efforts to steady the situation, the overall damage to the faction was kept within acceptable limits. However, to maintain the faction's influence, Lord Valuala could no longer afford to monopolize someone like Shiomi. As a result, the previous restrictions that required going through Valuala to contact Shiomi were lifted, and Trumbelio, one of the three major noble houses within the Democratic faction, began to increase their contact with him. There was no split within the Democratic faction, but Valuala's previous handling of internal matters had led to some underlying disagreements. Shiomi understood that this wasn't something Lord Valuala could control alone. Even so, he had still underestimated just how much attention he had drawn. And so. Sigh. Shiomi sat slouched on the study sofa, feeling the weight of it all. Especially in matters related to Islama, he had essentially been the central figure. Thanks to coordination between the two Democratic lords, the Clock Tower hadn't investigated him directly, but had instead invited him under various pretenses to help with the aftermath. Because of that, Shiomi had been swamped with official business throughout October and November. He didn't even have time to assist El Meloitu in retrieving the stolen relic of Iskander. He had to leave that to Sakura and Gray. You look exhausted, my husband, Morgan said, placing her hand gently on his forehead. Not really, Shiomi opened his eyes. I just realized. My life as a magus had been too simple. I never really confronted the realities of the magecraft world. Morgan looked intrigued. Go on. We often say that magi have values completely different from ordinary people, and can't be judged by common standards of good and evil, Shiomi reflected. But if you dig deeper, as long as we still consider ourselves human, we inevitably carry all the traits of humanity. He opened his eyes and met Morgan's gaze. Have you ever heard of Buddhism's 5 aggregates and 8 sufferings? I know a little, Morgan replied. But I'm no Buddha. I can't have a profound discussion with you about that. I don't know much either, Shiomi admitted with a wry smile. But I've come to understand at least this. No matter how lofty their ideals, even magi who chase the root are still bound by the same suffering. That's why, in the end, they're human. He looked at her again, eyes searching. So. I've always wondered. You're a fairy. Even though you look like us, the world you see, it must be completely different from ours, right? Like Gray's Village, or the Atlas Institute, or the perfect beauty Islama sought. Like cripples disturbing a still lake, Morgan smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting his face. Don't make fairies out to be so mysterious. When I first came to this world, I was just a child. I see. Shiomi smiled, finally understanding. He figured the recent mess with the clock tower had really worn him down. Hence why he suddenly started rambling like this to Morgan. Sakura's back. Gray too, Morgan said. Most Magus residences were protected by boundary fields, so the moment someone crossed them, those inside would immediately notice. They're back already, huh? Shiomi sat up. Ah. That reminds me, the holy relic. Are we really going to have Sakura go down the same road I did? There had been a deeper reason why Shiomi hadn't prepared a holy relic for the Holy Grail War. Those things were expensive, and there was no guarantee the summoned servant would even be a good match. After weighing everything, he'd found the cost too high for the potential return, which was why he'd made the choice he had. So when he went downstairs and brought it up with Sakura, she didn't seem too concerned. She said El Meloy too had offered to lend her the relic as thanks, but she wasn't very fond of his kinder. She felt she wouldn't mesh well with such a bold, domineering figure. So, even though he was a top-tier servant, Sakura considered him more of a backup plan than a first choice. So, El Meloy too finally decided to withdraw from the Fifth Holy Grail War? Shiomi rubbed his temples. Yes, Sakura nodded. Just then, the doorbell rang again. Shiomi stood up to answer it. It was the local mail carrier with a delivery. What he received, however, was a package about the size of a household first aid kit, which struck Shiomi as odd. He examined the sender and recipient information. The recipient's name was written in English. His own. And the sender's was written in the same way. Oko Ozaki. Shiomi scratched his head. It was Oko Ozaki. But he had never actually met Oko herself, only heard a few remarks about her from Toko. Which meant there was no chance the fifth magician would randomly send him something. That left only one likely possibility. It was from Toko. He'd heard she often used her sister's name to borrow money, so mailing something under the same alias to avoid being tracked made perfect sense. There were several other victims of Toko's name-swapping antics. Some even her old classmates. Even now, with her sealing designation lifted, she still clung to this habit, if it could be called that. While stepping back inside, Shiomi untied the string around the package and peeled back the carefully wrapped paper. Inside was a plain but remarkably sturdy box. "Dad, was that mail for you?" Sakura asked as he returned to the living room. It was forwarded through the clock tower. Shiomi set the box on the table in front of her. "It's addressed to me, but it's actually for you." "Huh? For me?" Sakura looked surprised. Shiomi unlocked the rune-sealed box and slowly lifted the lid. Resting on a deep blue cushion inside was a fragment of ancient wood, carved with a time-worn pattern. Even a single glance was enough to feel the centuries embedded in it. The more options you have, the better. Including holy relics. That was all Shiomi said. Chapter 142, January 31, 2004. After arranging Sakura's return procedures, she had departed for Fuyuki 7 days earlier, on January 24, London time. Shiomi had originally hoped that both he and his family could stay far away from the carnage of the Fifth Holy Grail War. But Sakura made a choice that went completely against his expectations. Shiomi couldn't say whether Sakura would emerge victorious or if something unforeseen might occur during the war. What he was certain of, however, was that among the current magus, whether they walked the righteous or twisted path, those capable of killing Sakura were extremely few. According to the intelligence Shiomi had gathered, these top-tier magus had no real interest in the Holy Grail War ritual. He gazed out at the snow-covered courtyard. In this moment of stillness, Shiomi felt an unusual sense of unrest. Was it because this was the first time he had let Sakura go so far away, embarking alone on such an unknown journey? Maybe this was what people called a parent's heart, he thought. He had wanted to go with her. But the clock tower was about to hold the grand roll, which involved the excavation of the spiritual tomb of Albion. It was said that the spiritual tomb of Albion served as a physical passage to the inner sea of the planet. But with guardians so formidable that even dragons would collapse from exhaustion, modern magus could only reach depths of about 80 kilometers. Beyond it lay a realm no human could tread. The fairy realm. Shiomi wasn't particularly interested in Albion itself. What intrigued him more was the fairy realm. A place unreachable by humans. But as someone born in the land of shadows, and with Morgan, the rightful fairy queen, as his bride, perhaps he could catch a glimpse of things no magus of this era had ever seen. Moreover, the very ones who recommended him for the grand role were the two lords of the democratic faction. Given such earnest support, Shiomi had no choice but to leave himself some leeway. He chose to believe Sakura would handle the Holy Grail War and return safely. "Dad, have some tea." A familiar voice called out from behind. Thanks. You go ahead and finish what you were doing." Shiomi answered reflexively, but the moment the words left his mouth, he realized something was off. He turned around abruptly and saw a girl with long purple hair sitting on the sofa. She wore the exact same outfit as the girl who had appeared in the Forest of Islum a few months ago. But this time, she made no effort to conceal her face and appeared in Shiomi's study openly and without shame. Shiomi was filled with shock and confusion. After returning from the Mystic Eye Collection train, Sakura had decided to change her appearance. Under Morgan's guidance, she learned to use magecraft to alter and fix her features. Back then, she had changed her hair and eye color to purple. Shiomi had found it novel at the time but couldn't shake the feeling that it looked oddly familiar. Now he finally realized. From a certain angle, Sakura had come to resemble that nameless girl more and more. The two looked exactly alike, distinguished only by the length of their hair. Who are you? Why are you pretending to be Sakura? Shiomi's guard was up to the highest level. I am both Sakura and not Sakura, the nameless girl said casually. You can call me BB. As for whether it stands for BB or baby, I'll leave that up to you, Daddy. What are you scheming this time? Trying to throw me into even more trouble at the upcoming Grand Roll? Shiomi demanded. For Byron Islama, the head of Islama, to pull off such a blatantly flawed setup to that extent. It couldn't have happened without your help behind the scenes. The girl calling herself BB gave a confident smile. No, I merely slipped some useful information into Islama's intelligence network while Mr. Byron was at his wit's end. In the end, the choice was his. Magus are all the same, really. TSK. Shiomi itched to act, but he could sense it. BB was both physically present and not. Such a paradoxical form was the very embodiment of the imaginary number attribute at its peak. Even Sakura couldn't achieve this yet. If he made a move, BB would likely vanish into the sea of imaginary numbers, only to reappear elsewhere the next time. But don't get the wrong idea. Whether human magus seek the root or try to uncover mysteries, that's not my concern. BB raised her teacup and took a refined sip. What I care about is you, Daddy. Gee, thanks. Shiomi's mouth twitched. Her tone and way of speaking were exactly like Sakura's. Or rather, it was a perfect reflection of Sakura's magus side. Strong-willed, unwavering, impossible to manipulate. That was the core Sakura had forged for herself as she matured. But are you really okay with this? Sending your daughter into the battlefield of the Fifth Holy Grail War? Even with a holy relic capable of summoning a Knight of the Round Table, there's no guarantee it'll all go smoothly, right? BB pointed out the cold truth. Shiomi pressed a hand to his desk, keeping a close eye on BB's every move. If you claim to be Sakura and yet not Sakura, then you should know better than anyone just how capable that child is as my daughter, BB. Yes, as a magus, she was first taught by a rune magus from the Land of Shadows, and after her initiation, she received personal instruction from the renowned fairy queen Morgan. In terms of personal talent, as a magus, she's unrivaled among her generation. BB set down her teacup and lightly clapped her hands in praise. She really is the epitome of a perfect woman. With that, she stood up. And in the next instant, appeared beside Shiomi. But no matter how brilliant a magus may be, they are still just a magus. The power of magecraft has its limits. Even if the King of Heroes, Gilgamesh, were to manifest again, he still couldn't kill Sakura, Shiomi said. You, who are now using the sea of imaginary numbers to blur the boundary of existence itself, should understand just how vast the potential of imaginary numbers magecraft truly is. BB didn't deny it. You're right. But that's precisely why. Because it's magecraft, no matter how skilled the magus may be, there will always be a natural enemy. No. It would be more accurate to call it an insurmountable existence. Her words struck directly at the unease Shiomi had been unable to dispel. You're serious? Shiomi was still cautious, but for the first time, he truly looked at the girl. One who shared Sakura's face, her very temperament, and yet was not Sakura. BB. Whoever she really was, Shiomi could no longer ignore what she said. Then, the girl leaned in and whispered a name into Shiomi's ear. That name completely changed his view of the Fifth Holy Grail War. He had to leave for Fuiuki immediately. Chapter 143, Prologue, Sakura's servant summoning 2.5 years later, boarding a passenger plane from England and returning to Fuiuki City, Japan, Sakura Shiomi found she felt little of the typical homesickness that came with returning to one's homeland. Perhaps it was because, ever since the end of the Fourth Holy Grail War, her father had made it a point to take the whole family traveling around the world during every long holiday. Egypt, South America, Northern Europe, North America, Australia. Even the rarely visited Antarctic continent. Sakura had seen it all during the Southern Hemisphere's summer. Maybe that's why she felt little attachment to the country of her birth. Whether as a magus or as the eldest daughter of the Shiomi family, it was the same. Besides, her days at the clock tower had been pleasant. She frequently audited magecraft lessons in El Meloy's classroom, which was always livelier than any other classroom in the tower. After picking up her checked luggage, Sakura stepped onto the airport's moving walkway and advanced slowly. It was January 24th. 7 days remained until the scheduled start of the Holy Grail War. But based on past records, heroic spirit summoning had likely already begun. The assassin class, for example, could be summoned in advance. At that thought, Sakura reached over her shoulder bag and felt for the box tucked in a corner of her backpack. It was a holy relic specially prepared by her father for the Fifth Holy Grail War. A fragment from the round table used by the Knights of the Round Table, once presided over by King Arthur. Though the relic was somewhat broad in nature, it meant she could potentially summon a servant from among the Round Table knights who would be best suited to her. Servants from the Round Table generally possessed A rank stats or higher and often manifested in one of the 3 strongest knight classes. Confident in her own strength, Sakura was filled with determination. "It's all your fault, Shiryu. We almost missed the plane because you were dawdling." "Dawdling? Come on, Ilya. There's no way to hurry with so much stuff." Alright, no more fighting. If you keep arguing, Mom is going to have to give you both a lesson." Voices rang out cheerfully from beyond the moving walkway. Sakura lifted her head slightly and, through the narrow space between her cap and sunglasses, glanced at the source of the voices. It was a family outing, like a small tour group. They chatted and laughed about their trip as they hurried past, crossing paths with her on the moving walkway. And Sakura recognized them. Or more accurately, the man at the center and the beautiful woman beside him. Garrett Sugumiya and Iris V. Ilvanensburn. They had settled in Fuyuki after the previous Holy Grail War. Moreover, Denkai Shiomi had once helped Garrett Sugumiya retrieve his and Iris V. Il's daughter from the Insburn family in Germany. Because of that, Sakura knew a little about their family. But since moving to England, she hadn't paid them much attention. For them to go on an overseas trip right after New Year's, when spring break was still far off, was a bit perplexing. Sakura could only come to one conclusion. The Amiya family was intentionally avoiding the Fifth Holy Grail War. After all, according to the intel Rains had gathered, the Insburn family hadn't given up hope just because Ilya, who was meant to be the next Lesser Grail, had been taken away. No matter the means, the Insburn had prepared another Lesser Grail. That was a prerequisite for the Fifth Holy Grail War to even begin. It was possible the Tasaka and Matu families had also played a role in making it happen. In any case, learning that potential participating Magus had already left Fuyuki before she even arrived was useful information indeed. Stepping out of the airport, Sakura hailed a taxi and headed straight for the Shiomi residence in Fuyuki. At times like this, she couldn't help but marvel at how convenient magecraft was compared to science. Thanks to a specific enchantment, there wasn't even a speck of dust. Let alone cobwebs. Inside the house, the entire mansion was exactly as it had been when the family moved to London. Only the overgrown weeds and branches in the garden hinted at the passage of time. As she unpacked her things, Sakura casually cast a few spells over the garden. In this way, while making various preparations for the Holy Grail War, the days passed quickly. She opened the secret door to the magecraft workshop. Cold fluorescent light flickered on as the hidden chamber came into view. 10 years ago, her father, Denkai Shiomi, had held his own summoning ritual for the Holy Grail War right here. Sakura crouched down and inspected the lingering traces of the summoning circle she had drawn with her own hands. A strange sense of time slipping by washed over her. It was February 1st. As night fell, Sakura could feel her mana wavelength gradually growing more active. Magecraft, by its very nature, was tied to mystery. Most magus would find their mana resonate more strongly at night. An equally mystical time. That was why summoning rituals for the Holy Grail War were typically held at night, to increase the chances of summoning a servant with a strong class and high capabilities. She scattered a dusting of magical powder across the floor, and the previously faint summoning circle quickly lit up, becoming clearly visible. Placing the prepared holy relic on the altar, Sakura stood before the circle. She took a deep breath to calm her slightly racing heart, extended the command spell that had formed with markings resembling her own name, and slowly began chanting the incantation. As she recited the summoning spell, stanza by stanza, she could feel her magic circuits begin to stir throughout her body. But she wasn't like most. Having trained under a system of magecraft completely different from the norm, and having run countless simulations of the mana requirements involved in summoning, her circuits surged without strain. Her body felt no pressure at all. "I hereby declare. You are under my protection. My fate rests with your blade. Heed the call of the Holy Grail. If you accept this path and this principle, then respond. I make this vow. I am the one who performs all good in this world. I am the one who commits all evil in this world. You, clad in the 3 great words across 7 days. Come forth from the circle of restraint, guardian of the scales." The chant was crisp and clean. At the exact moment her magical wavelength peaked, Sakura completed the summoning spell. Wind and smoke erupted from the center of the summoning circle, and from within stepped a small knight clad in armor. Judging by stature alone, the figure seemed even shorter than Sakura, causing a flicker of doubt in her heart. Had the summoning failed? Had she not called forth a knight of the Round Table? Then the knight's armor gave a slight shudder, emitting a series of clanks and clicks. Just like the mag transformations she'd watched in childhood anime, the helmet disassembled into separate parts, merging into other sections of the armor, and revealed a face framed by a golden ponytail. In that instant, Sakura, who had previously been unable to discern the servant's true name or noble phantasm, suddenly recognized the identity standing before her. More than the name itself, it was the face that truly caught her off guard. She had encountered that face once before. But the person now before her was not the king she had once known. "My name is Mordred. As the only legitimate heir to Arthur Pendragon, the King of Knights, I have manifested in the saber class." Though the face was that of a young girl, the voice rang out with the bright, clear tone of a spirited young boy. "I ask you, are you my master?" Chapter 144. Sakura didn't have a very good impression of the Fuiuki Church. In her 16 years of life, she had only been there once. That time, she was left with no choice but to be adopted by a stranger as his daughter. Though her initial fear and unease gradually gave way to peace and happiness, Sakura still couldn't bring herself to like the place. Crossing the Fuiuki Bridge into the city's outskirts, she passed through the old district, climbed the long sloping road, and finally reached a high platform overlooking the sea. There, beside a foreign cemetery, stood the church. Phew. Now that's impressive. Saber, materialized beside Sakura, let out a whistle and grinned as she sized up the Fuiuki Church. A broad, level plaza stretched out in front of the building, leading to a chapel that, while not especially tall, carried a surprising sense of presence. "So why are we coming to a church? Shouldn't we be out looking for other masters and servants?" Saber asked, clearly puzzled. Sakura pushed open the church doors and explained patiently, "I didn't officially register for the Holy Grail War through the Mages Association, so I thought I should stop by the church to greet the people here." If the intel she had gathered was accurate, the one assigned to oversee the church and the ritual this time around was someone quite familiar with her father. As she crossed the plaza, she stole a glance at the servant following behind her. Mordred, the Knight of Rebellion. When she acquired the catalyst, Sakura had anticipated a number of possible outcomes. To be safe, she had even added her mother's name to the summoning incantation, hoping to narrow the options to the knights raised by Morgan in legend. Gawain, Gareth, Agravain, and Mordred. Supposedly, the Lady of the Lake was also a facet of Morgan, so Lancelot might have been a possibility too. As fate would have it, she summoned Mordred. Sakura couldn't help but wonder if this was karmic irony. Her involvement in the Holy Grail War, going against her father's wish to keep the family away from it, might have been a kind of rebellion. Maybe that's why Mordred came. She sighed inwardly. "So much for being a good daughter. You're really by the book. Maybe I should start calling you lady from now on, master," Saber joked as they walked. "I'm not exactly a rough girl, but being called lady reminds me of my teachers at school." "Better not," Sakura replied with a gentle smile. "Still, I'll be counting on your strength in the coming Holy Grail War, Sir Knight." Her choice of words seemed to please Saber, who thumped her armored chest with a metallic clang. "Leave it to me, master. Doesn't matter who the enemy is. I'll wipe them all out for you." "That's reassuring," Sakura said with a bright smile. When they reached the church doors, Sakura pushed them open and stepped inside. It was after hours, so the lights were off, but moonlight spilled in through the windows, revealing a figure standing at the altar. It was a short-haired nun, just slightly taller than Sakura, and looking only a few years older. "I didn't expect anyone to visit the church at this hour. When I saw the final spot on the spirit board had been filled, I thought maybe a master had already dropped out," the nun said kindly. "I didn't expect the last master to be you. When I received the list from the Mages Association, I thought you wouldn't be taking part this time." "Not at all. I just thought it best to drop by and say hello. Wouldn't want to be mistaken for someone who accidentally stumbled into the Holy Grail War." Sakura gave a polite bow. "It's been a while, Sister Seal. I hope you've been well." Standing before her was Seal, an executor of the burial agency and current overseer for the Holy Church. During the previous Holy Grail War, the overseer had been assassinated. Though it was eventually revealed that his own son had killed him, the church revised its policy on appointments. This time, they dispatched an executor from the burial agency. A group infamous even within church headquarters. To Fuiuki to serve as overseer. "Everything is fine." Seal nodded. "So, you're the master of Saber in this Holy Grail War, Sakura?" "Yes. I came here mainly to inform the church of my identity. Considering what happened in the last Holy Grail War, I don't want to be treated as a suspicious individual and end up being targeted by all sides if something goes wrong," Sakura explained with a pleasant smile. Saber, standing nearby, couldn't help but complain via telepathy, "Hey now, master, that's a bit too cautious, isn't it? In that case, I suppose I can now officially confirm you as one of the two masters whose identities were previously unverified," Seal said. "I happen to know your father, so let's treat this as a precaution. If you happen to lose, I'll do everything I can to ensure your personal safety." Just as Sakura was about to thank her, Saber cut in. That won't be necessary. As long as I'm here, my master won't lose. Such a confident servant. I'm sure you'll achieve outstanding results. Seal didn't press further, offering only a polite compliment. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Sakura turned and left the church. What a pointless trip. Total waste of time, Saber grumbled. Not satisfied? Not really. But now I get a better sense of what kind of person you are, master, Saber said. When I first saw my master was a woman, I was a little uneasy. Thought you might be like mother. I see. Sakura didn't respond further. She was always extremely cautious when dealing with servants. Until she fully understood their character, she would never speak unnecessarily. Even when dealing with Mordred, who was raised by Morgan, she acted the same. After all, unlike her father, she didn't possess overwhelming combat prowess. But she could still manage top-tier servants with ease. Right, master. Once we get back, I want to ask you something, Saber said. This outfit's fine for battle, but I'd like to wear something different when we're not fighting. Her voice abruptly stopped. Sakura didn't press her. Standing at the top of the slope outside the church, both of them spotted a figure halfway down. A master and a servant wearing matching colored coats. A servant of the archer class. After confirming the servant's class, Sakura looked toward the master staring straight at her. I knew coming out was the right call. I didn't even need to go to you. Here you are already, sis. She smiled as she greeted the person on the slope. That master was none other than her biological sister. Rin Tasaka. Chapter 145. Rin had summoned her servant a day earlier than Sakura. After the last Holy Grail War, their father, Tokiomi Tasaka, had his magic circuits completely destroyed by the core of the Grail, leaving his capabilities as a magus barely above that of an ordinary person. As a result, under the supervision of the Mages Association, Rin inherited the Tasaka family's magic crest through a transplant from her father. Before this Holy Grail War began, just like her father had once done, she sent their parents to take shelter at her mother's family home, the Zenju household. Everything concerning the relics and the summoning rituals was handled by Rin alone. Watching his daughter grow at a pace far beyond his own, Tokiomi was pleased. Knowing he could no longer offer any meaningful assistance, he chose not to interfere. That evening, Rin took Archer on a patrol around Fuiuki City. The goal was to help her servant get familiar with the area in preparation for the war. But she ended up running into someone she didn't expect. Sakura. After her younger sister had been adopted out, Rin had been taught to treat it as if she no longer had a sister. However, after Tokiomi lost most of his power as a magus, Rin had been forced to go learn the basics of magecraft from the very household that adopted Sakura. Shiomi's home. Perhaps to avoid suspicion, Denkai Shiomi never allowed Sakura to attend lessons with Rin. The two sisters only saw each other during breaks and played together then. 2.5 years ago, Sakura moved with her family to London, where the clock tower was located. Rin missed her deeply, but she knew Sakura must be living a better life than she was. In any case, Rin believed that Tenkai Shiomi was definitely a good father. That much was clear from how he behaved while teaching her magecraft. Still, she never imagined that Sakura would return to Fuiuki during the Holy Grail War. Let alone that she'd summon a saber-class servant. Rin had followed her all the way here and arrived just outside the church in Fuiuki, bringing them to this perfectly timed reunion. The church itself was a neutral zone. But once you stepped outside the gate, that neutrality no longer applied. From the way you're talking, it's almost like you were waiting for me to show up, Rin said with a grin, though there was a hint of tension in her smile. Facing her own sister like this, Rin still felt some hesitation. Worse yet, she had no knowledge of Sakura's magecraft or her skill level. An absolute blind spot in the coming war. Not exactly, Sakura said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. But from the moment I decided to join the Holy Grail War, I knew this day would come. I just didn't expect my first opponent to be you. Yeah, I'm just as surprised. The Holy Grail War isn't a game, Sakura. You should go back to the church, renounce your rights as a master to the overseer, and leave Fuiuki while you still can. Rin pointed toward the church behind her. Oh, so that's your sister? What a brutal world, Saber remarked, eyes locked on the archer whose origins and region remained a mystery. That her master and another master were sisters didn't bother Mordred in the slightest. If her master said they were going to fight, then she would fight. No hesitation. She might refrain from landing the first blow, just as a courtesy to her master. Sakura let out a light sigh. Honestly, sis. You've never even been to the clock tower, and you've never had a proper duel with a real magus. You're the one who should be giving up your master rights. Huh? Rin's voice rose in disbelief. Separation Castle, the Mystic Eye Collection train. Sakura smiled flawlessly. Life at the clock tower is full of twists and turns. You really should have gone there to study, like I did. The implication was clear. Rin was just a countryside magus, training alone on her family's ley line out in the Far East, untouched by the true world of magecraft. Sakura, on the other hand, had fully immersed herself in the magus world and developed a far deeper understanding of the magical arts. So? Are you going to give up your right to participate and seek refuge in the church now? Sakura echoed Rin's earlier words right back at her. A vein twitched at Rin's temple, and she forced a strained smile. You've gotten sharp-tongued, haven't you, Sakura? Where's that sweet little sister of mine gone? And what's with the purple hair? This isn't dyed, Sakura replied casually, running her fingers through the ends of her hair. A first-rate magus can change their hair and eye color just by using mana. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, she gave a surprised look. Wait. Don't tell me you can't even do that? No way, right? The sisters might have been at odds on the surface, but their playful squabbling showed how close they still were. Saber listened in with amusement, while Archer beside Rin turned his face away, trying to hide his smirk. Fine then. Let's settle this. It's my duty as the older sister. Archer. Rin shouted. Archer immediately dropped his smile, his expression turning serious. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Rin? Of course. Sakura has a servant too, right? And not just any servant. Saber, the strongest class. If we take out her servant, she's out of the Holy Grail War. Rin pointed at Saber, clearly frustrated, and more than a little envious. She'd done everything by the book to summon a powerful servant. And yet, it was her sister who summoned Saber. That twinge of insecurity was impossible to ignore. Understood, Master. But I don't fight other masters. Especially not women. That part's on you. Even as he spoke, Archer released a surge of powerful fighting spirit, entering a battle-ready stance. Saber grinned, matching his intensity with a fierce aura of her own. The wind howled as Archer vanished from sight. Idiot. She'd expected him to draw bow. But instead, he charged head-on. Saber, fully armored, met him like a runaway horse. Her silver blade flashed as she launched a high-speed strike. A piercing metallic clash rang out. Archer blocked the attack with a black dagger. After the first clash, the two servants stood in front of their respective masters once again. Saber's sword had a far longer reach than Archer's dagger, and the gap in attack range was obvious. For Archer, initiating the fight was a clear disadvantage. Saber could simply wait for him to step into her range and strike. Hey! So you're going with close combat instead of a bow? Mordred bared her teeth in a wide grin. Then don't blame me for not holding back. With burning intensity, Saber charged. She swung her long sword in both hands, pressing in like a tidal wave, closing the distance step by step, even giving up her range advantage to push harder. It was the kind of reckless move that should have opened her to a fatal counter. But it didn't go as one might expect. Forehead, throat, chest, shoulders. Even clad in armor, Saber didn't let a single one of Archer's strikes land. With strikes too fast to leave even after images, Saber's relentless slashes forced Archer to retreat to the wide lawn at the side of the slope, pulling the battlefield away from Rin. If he didn't back off quickly enough, he'd be caught within the reach of her blade. If he tried to dodge and counterattack, the silver sword would slice into his abdomen. Worse yet, even if he tried to press forward recklessly, the range where he could actually land a hit was incredibly limited. Chapter 146, Saber was clad in full armor, with only her head exposed, making her a small and difficult target for Archer's short sword. The difference in their physiques was stark. Saber was a full 2 or 3 heads shorter. Yet she drove Archer back again and again, even seeming to overpower him. Despite wielding a long sword that was only about half her height, Saber's attacks only grew more intense, showing no sign of fatigue. Oh come on. What's wrong? Is that all you've got, Archer? Caught up in the heat of battle, Saber even had the energy to mock him. With her words, she leapt high into the air, raising her sword with both hands and bringing it down at a speed too fast for the eye to follow. Archer grunted as he struggled to block the blow. But then, something worse happened. The weapon in his hand, possibly a noble phantasm, couldn't withstand the strike. The blade shattered at the center, breaking apart like fragile glass. Die. Saber's tone turned cold, brimming with lethal intent. It was as if her strength knew no bounds. Even after her strike had reached its lowest point, she still found the power to drive upward. Her longsword was set to cut through Archer from the hip to the shoulder in a single slash. Crack. But instead of the sound of flesh being cleaved, there was only the clamor of metal colliding. The force sent Archer stumbling back several meters. His feet dug twin gouges into the lawn as he braced against the impact. So you're dual-wielding, Saber muttered, resting her sword on her shoulder with one hand, her brow furrowing. No wonder his swordplay had seemed off. He'd deliberately hidden a second weapon, hoping to catch her off guard. But in the end, all it did was help him survive. What struck Saber as even stranger was how the black short sword that had just broken was now back in Archer's hand. In the other, he held a white short sword clearly meant to form a matching pair. Thinking of backing down? Archer stood there as if he hadn't even warmed up, his dual blades at the ready. As if a crimson flash lit up the scene, and in the next moment, Saber was already on him. Her long sword clashed repeatedly with Archer's twin blades. Now that she'd realized the fragility of Archer's weapons, Saber attacked with even greater ferocity. As expected, Archer's swords couldn't withstand her barrage. They shattered like porcelain, knocked away with ease. But that was the problem. No matter how many times Saber destroyed them, identical blades instantly reappeared in Archer's hands. There was no opening, no chance to exploit a moment of weakness. The battle between the two servants continued like a relentless tide. From halfway up the slope, Rin could barely follow the flurry of exchanges. She was undeniably spellbound. Rin wanted to help with her magecraft, but she feared it might not only be useless. It could actually drag Archer down. A magus could never match a servant. Rin had been taught that truth since she was a child. Listen carefully, Rin. There are beings of immense power in the world of magecraft, but we are not among them. So never even think of taking on a servant one-on-one. Watching the battle unfold, Rin was once again convinced that everything her father, Tokiomi, had said was absolutely right. Aren't you going to do anything, sister? Sakura's voice called out from the top of the slope, and Rin snapped her head around. Unlike Rin, who had been captivated by the battle, Sakura had produced a staff. Or rather, a wand. From somewhere. It was a high-grade mystic code. Rin could tell at a glance. The gemstone set into the top of the simple wooden shaft shimmered with extraordinary power. Magi often used mystic codes to amplify their spells. Tokiomi, for instance, had a staff embedded with a ruby that greatly enhanced his flame-based magecraft. He had originally intended to pass that wand down to Rin, but she'd asked him to keep it to protect himself. Then, I won't hold back, Sakura said, raising the wand slightly and softly transmitting her thoughts to Saber. Fall back, Saber. Sensing the mana, Saber deftly avoided Archer's strike and stepped back a few paces. Before Archer could reset his stance, a barrage of icicles rained down from above. Though they didn't cause real damage, they still posed a significant nuisance. His combat instincts, honed through experience, kicked in instantly. He dodged Saber's next strike just in time, breaking through the frozen ground with brute force. Ice magecraft? No way. Isn't your attribute imaginary? How can you use large-scale elemental magecraft? Rin shouted in disbelief. Sakura smiled proudly and held up her wand. This is a mystic code Father made for me. As long as I channel mana into it, I can use any elemental magecraft. Except for the basic 4. It was my birthday present last year. What? You can cast magecraft outside your own attribute just by having mana? That's totally unfair. Then let's switch to fire. Saber, coordinate with my attack. Sakura ignored Rin's reaction, intent on backing up her servant. Unlike Rin, who was facing a servant for the first time, Sakura had studied magecraft under Morgan from an early age, and just last summer, she'd even begun simulating Holy Grail wars alongside their parents. She might not be able to match a servant in direct combat, but she was more than capable of reading the battlefield and supporting her servant's offense without hesitation. Not that easy. Rin shot back. A black magical bullet flew at Sakura, colliding with the fire arrow she'd loosed. The impact cancelled both out midair. Rin stood with her left arm extended, fingers tight together, and her right hand bracing her left elbow, forming a makeshift magecraft cannon. I remember your magic crest is engraved on your left arm. You can cast spells without chanting, can't you? Sakura said, holding her wand in both hands with a pout. Isn't that a little unfair? You're getting better at being infuriating, Sakura. Rin wore a big smile, but she was close to boiling over. You've turned into a proper little devil. It was fine that her younger sister had a better life and even surpassed her in skill. But that personality. There was something subtle about it, a mischievous edge. Like a miniature demon. She remembered when they used to play at the Shiomi house a few years back. Sakura had been way cuter back then. Now she was starting to resemble Karin. I'm only repeating what you've said before. It's all true, so what's so annoying about it? Sakura tilted her head and blinked sweetly. Ugh. That's it. Don't blame me if you end up crying later. Fuming, Rin shouted and fired a lead ball-sized Gandra from her palm. Chapter 147, Gandra was a spell known for being both easy to control and highly effective. Even at minimal output, it could knock out an ordinary person. With the caster's fingers pressed together like a cannon barrel, it fired a magic bullet powerful enough to punch through reinforced concrete. For a regular person, it could be lethal. Even a magus would be in serious trouble if hit directly. But that was under ideal conditions. If the target was a top-tier magus, fully prepared, it was a different story. Rin didn't expect Gandra alone to take down Sakura. She had already prepared a gem, intending to launch a true attack with gem magecraft the moment Gandra disrupted Sakura's defense. But just as she reached for the gem, she saw something that stunned her. The Gandra began to slow midair, finally halting in front of Sakura's wand. It hovered gently, like a stabilized bubble, as her wand guided its motion. Sigh. Did you forget, sister? What kind of magecraft is father best at? Sakura looked at the magic bullet. Gandra is a curse passed down from Norse tradition. It's a type of rune magecraft. Using rune magecraft on a rune magus. Isn't that a little careless? What? How? Rin was dumbfounded. She never imagined her spell would be hijacked. Once fired, Gandra was like a bullet leaving a gun. Unstoppable unless it hit its target or faded from distance. It wasn't something that could be intercepted mid-flight. And yet, Sakura had caught her spell as casually as catching a ball. Unfortunately for you, unlike the common rune magecraft that anyone can learn, I've been studying a more special kind, Sakura said with an embarrassed smile. Though honestly, I haven't mastered much of it yet. Most of her studies had been under her mother's guidance. The Great Witch herself. Who had helped Sakura build her own unique magecraft system. Still, even without full mastery, just one or two of the primordial runes were enough. This was the sixth of the primordial runes, the rune of curse reversal. It returned damage inflicted by curses back to the caster, doubled. And since Gandra was, at its core, a curse-type magecraft, it was the perfect target. Rin could only watch as the Gandra she had fired was twisted by Sakura's wand, growing to twice its original size. Sis, better catch this one, Sakura said cheerfully, waving her wand. Her tone was light, like back when she, Rin, and Karan used to play catch together as kids, cold sweat beading on her forehead. Rin didn't hesitate. She pulled a green gem from her pocket. Bought. Mana surged from the gem, forming a rectangular shield that intercepted the rebounded, empowered Gandra. Before the barrier gave way, Rin swiftly pulled out several more gems. Sex. Einfluss, Einhalt. 2 green gems curved sharply around the mana shield, each splitting into 2. 4 magic bullets struck from different angles, converging on Sakura. Their aim was to completely restrict Sakura's movement and take her down. Even if someone got hurt, they could always heal afterward. A magus on the battlefield had to have at least that much resolve. A violent explosion erupted at the top of the slope, kicking up a thick cloud of smoke. Rin dashed forward, preparing her next spell as she charged in, aiming to launch a second attack at close range. But no one. As the smoke cleared on the slope above, Rin saw nothing. Not even a trace of Sakura's presence. Not a shadow, not a single strand of hair. There was no way her magecraft could have done this. And there was no chance her sister had been obliterated like that. Looking for me, sister? A sweet voice rang out from behind her, and Rin jumped in shock. She spun around, instantly flinging a gem to detonate, and reinforced her legs to leap away from the spot. But again, the explosion hit nothing. As she landed, her peripheral vision caught sight of Sakura. Now several meters to her left. That won't do, sister. I heard from Dad that the Tasaka family's magecraft is different from ours. Yours especially needs money, right? Even with a huge inheritance, those high-quality gems aren't exactly easy to come by, Sakura said playfully, feigning concern. Every word was carefully aimed to get under Rin's skin. Without a doubt, this was one of Sakura's tactics. Taunting her opponent mid-battle, disrupting their focus to provoke a fatal mistake. And because they were sisters who knew each other inside and out, it worked even better. Of course, that only worked when one had the upper hand. And right now, Sakura clearly did. She hadn't even launched a serious attack, yet Rin already felt like she was being run ragged. Teleportation? Rin forced a smile. She realized she might have underestimated Sakura's potential. Back when they were still both Tasaka, before being separated, whether it was cards or any kind of game, Sakura had rarely won. Whenever Sakura pulled a good hand, Rin would always have a better one. Like she was naturally more favored by fate. But Rin knew better than anyone, her sister wasn't weak. This was simply the difference between two people with talent. And what became of it over time? However. No, this is my magecraft. Imaginary numbers, Sakura said, tucking her wand behind her back. Right now, I can only teleport within a limited range, but Dad says that's more than enough. Yeah. It really is, Rin muttered, finally grasping it, unable to hold back a wave of emotion. Sakura had already learned how to exploit the gap between imaginary space and the real world to move herself freely. That's why every single one of Rin's attacks had failed to connect. Even that one she'd pulled out of nowhere. It was probably stored in imaginary space. So even if there was a slight gap in innate talent, differences in the training they'd received could easily turn that gap into a chasm. After all, Rin had to study the Tasaka family's magecraft. She couldn't very well blame the person who'd helped lay her foundation for playing favorites. But that's still not enough. Second. Reinforcement. Stark Grossoi. A gem Rin had left nearby suddenly flared to life, flooding the area with blinding light. By the time the flash faded, Rin was already right in front of her. Brace yourself. I'll heal you later. Without hesitation, Rin drove a punch into Sakura's abdomen. She'd learned her fundamentals under Tenkai Shiomi. In less than 6 months, she'd already mastered everything he needed to teach. But Rin hadn't wanted to lose the excuse to visit her sister, so she'd begged to learn something else. Left with no choice, Shiomi taught her hand-to-hand combat. With proper training and body enhancement through magecraft, any magus could do it. Rin wasn't stuck in her ways. As long as it meant she could visit Shiomi's house each month and see Sakura, she was fine with it. She'd gone on to train in close combat for another 3 years. You really are father's star student. Rin froze. Her punch had been caught. Sakura seized Rin's arm and, with a fluid motion, threw her over her shoulder. Rin couldn't resist at all. Chapter 148, the battle between Saber and Archer was still raging. In just a few minutes, Saber had already shattered an uncountable number of daggers. 26 white, 27 black. They seemed endless, which only irritated the rebellious knight even more. What the hell is that weapon of yours? It's so damn annoying. Saber snapped. You're such a clingy bastard. Just die already. That's a strange thing to say. Would you obey your enemy and kill yourself? Archer replied, raising both blades in a flawless stance, ready to engage again. Saber's initial excitement had gradually faded into boredom. Fighting Archer any longer would just lead to the same outcome. She was starting to think about asking her master if they should just call it a day and retreat. With so many enemies in the Holy Grail War, there was no reason to waste time on such a dull opponent. What's wrong? Not attacking? Then I guess it's my turn. Before Archer could finish, a red figure flew overhead, soaring between the two servants. Huh? Both of them froze, watching Rin tumble across the grass in her red coat, getting up with a dirt-covered face. Then, a white figure followed the same arc, leaping over the pair. Celtic flying kick. Gah! With her mana-enhanced legs, Sakura's kick came crashing down on Rin. Rin crossed her arms to block, but still let out a pained cry as she stumbled backward several steps. Sakura landed lightly on the grass. Apparently, while the servants were clashing, their masters had also started fighting. And it was clear that Rin was being overpowered. Sakura had even thrown her off a small platform several meters high at the edge of the lawn. As a magus, Rin's body was reinforced with mana, so she didn't suffer any real injury. But the humiliation was unbearable. Why? Why the hell would you learn something like that? Rin shouted furiously. If my sister can learn it, then of course father would teach me too, Sakura said as she struck a textbook fighting pose and charged at Rin Tasaka. Though both were magus, their fight had almost nothing to do with magecraft. The two girls exchanged standard martial arts moves. Punches, kicks, each strike matching the other in intensity. Rin had been thrown earlier simply because she let her guard down, still treating her little sister like a typical magus. Their brawl was so intense it instantly drew all the heat out of Saber and Archer's standoff. The servants slowly loosened their grips on their weapons. Before long, the two had switched to spectator mode. No, Rin. Go for her lower half. Archer barked like a seasoned coach. Move. Dodge. Saber, on the other hand, was far more relaxed, casually cheering from the sidelines. Nice grab. That's it. Sakura ducked under Rin's roundhouse kick with fluid grace. Twisting her body mid-maneuver, she caught Rin's ankle and yanked her forward, trying to throw her off balance. But Rin wouldn't back down. Using the grip on her ankle as leverage, she launched herself forward and kicked out with her other leg. Unfortunately, that foot was also caught. Sakura planted her stance and spun on the spot, swinging her sister around several times before flinging her into the air. Essest gross. Essest klein. Vox, Goddess Atlas. Rin silently invoked her spell, altering her magecraft reinforcement to help her land with agility and control. No, Rin, don't go for a one-hit win, you need to. Archer's tactical advice was cut short. Because Rin, having landed on her feet, didn't go after Sakura. Instead, she charged straight at Archer and punched her own servant in the face, following up with a flurry of punches and kicks. Hey! Ow! Ow! Don't take it out on me just because you lost. Saber looked on, dumbfounded, as a supposedly unshakable servant was beaten up by his human master, howling in an embarrassingly pitiful voice. She couldn't help but wonder if that steely-hearted archer from earlier was just an illusion. The chaotic turn of events completely diffused the tense atmosphere. Saber, who had been eager for battle, lost all motivation and simply stood by, waiting for her master to make the next move. Well, after watching a brawl between the masters, she figured she'd gotten her entertainment's worth anyway. My master's really something. Never mind magecraft. She's this good at close combat too? She's practically flawless, Mordred laughed, brushing off the dirt as she walked up to Sakura. It's just family tradition, Sakura replied. She turned to look at Rin and Archer, now finished with their scuffle. Rin looked flustered, a far cry from her earlier bravado when she said, "I won't care if you cry." Archer had a rather awkward smile on his face. "So, do you still want to keep going, sister? Without support from your servant, you don't stand a chance against me," Sakura said plainly, stating the harsh truth. Rin looked away, sighing. "Forget it. I just wanted you to understand what the Holy Grail War is really like and go back to London to focus on school. But it turns out you've got way more talent than I expected. I was worried for nothing." "I'm happy you were worried about me," Sakura replied with a bright smile. "Saying that after winning is a little unfair, don't you think?" Rin muttered, clearly pleased but too proud to admit it, responding with its sundear awkwardness. Sakura then turned to Saber, as if asking for her take. If the fight were to continue, they'd probably have to coordinate again. Saber's high magic resistance was a factor. Sakura didn't mind using her skills to keep Saber off Rin, but if it could be avoided, all the better. "I'm fine either way. We've only just started. Deciding at the end works too," Saber said, tapping her sword against her armor with a metallic clang. With that, the two sisters and their servants started heading away from the Fuiuki church. "It's a bit of a walk to Mama Town. Let's go together, sister," Sakura suggested. "Yeah, why not?" But as soon as they stepped off the grass, a sudden chill made Rin shiver. She turned instinctively to check the source, only to find Sakura already stepping in front of her, wand at the ready, Saber beside her in a combat stance. At the top of the slope Sakura had just stood on, a silver-haired girl who looked no older than 12 or 13 appeared, flanked by a towering giant easily over 2 meters tall. "Ilyas V. van Insburn?" Sakura asked, uncertain. "That's not right. Don't call me by that traitor's name." "I don't have a name. Just call me Insburn," the homunculus girl replied, her voice cold as ice. Chapter 149, The clouds had cleared at some point, and moonlight now bathed the church grounds. Like creatures dragged from the pages of a storybook, their long shadows stretched across the earth. Like demons torn from a fairy tale. In the eerie, bluish glow of the dim city, stood something cruel, something that shouldn't exist. Berserker. Cold sweat formed on Rin's cheek. While Sakura was speaking with Insburn's master, Rin had already identified the towering figure. He was a servant of the Berserker class. "Sister, take your servant and fall back. Saber and I will hold the line," Sakura said, her eyes trembling slightly. Insburn's Berserker. His stats are off the charts. In the Holy Grail War, masters were granted the privilege of viewing their servant's class and parameters. Unless a special ability masked that data, just a glance was enough. This Berserker had all attributes rated A or higher, with strength at A+, and only luck at B. That alone put him above even the best Knight class servants. Normally, the Berserker class was used to enhance the abilities of weaker servants by way of mad enhancement. But if a servant who was already powerful was summoned as a Berserker, that was clearly the case now. "Don't be ridiculous. You want to take that thing on by yourself?" Rin shouted, staring at her sister standing ahead of her. There was no way she could just turn and run, leaving Sakura behind. This wasn't like their earlier scuffle, where there had still been room for restraint. The Insburn before them now was clearly here to eliminate both sisters. The pressure in the air was suffocating, filled with lethal intent. One wrong move and they could be crushed in an instant. That monster might be able to take on the other 6 servants all at once, Archer muttered, eyes locked on Berserker, calmly analyzing the massive difference in strength. Agreed. As Saber spoke, she charged forward, donning her helmet and entering full combat readiness. "I'll take your presence here as a declaration of war, then?" Sakura asked, eyes fixed on the homunculus. "Insburn? Surrender if you want. If you use your command spells now to make your servants self-destruct, I may consider sparing your lives," the girl replied in a voice as cold as ice. Sakura drew a deep breath. "Do you believe that, sister? Are you kidding? Without our servants, we'd be nothing but meat on a chopping block," Rin replied. "Then we're good." Without turning around, Sakura asked, "So, sister, do you still want to fight me, or do we deal with this together?" Obviously the latter. Despite the tension, Rin forced a smile. "There's no better teammate than you, Sakura." As she said this, She whispered to Archer, "The odds are 4-1. We can't take them head-on. Archer, stick to your usual tactics." She meant for Archer to fall back and provide long-range support, true to his class. There was no need for further discussion. The plan was already set. Saber would engage Berserker head-on. Rin and Sakura would watch In's burn and assist Saber with magecraft as needed. Without another word, Archer turned spirit form and retreated, searching for a vantage point to snipe from afar. Fighting that kind of monster alone isn't easy. "I'm counting on you, Saber." At that moment, Sakura reached out and placed her hand against Saber's cold armor. "What is this?" Saber felt power surging through her entire body. "A temporary rune enhancement that boosts all your stats," Sakura explained. "It'll last about 5 minutes. After that, you're on your own." 5 minutes is more than enough. With a shout, Saber charged forward just as Berserker leapt into the air. His massive frame soared unnaturally fast, closing the 10+ meters of the slope in an instant. He collided with Saber, who shot forth like a white meteor, and the violent impact unleashed a shockwave that blasted outward from their clash. Crimson lightning crackled from Saber's body, pushing back against Berserker's overwhelming might. It was Mana Burst. Mordred's innate skill. With the reinforcement Sakura had hurriedly applied, even a Berserker with superior strength could be forced back, at least for now. "Out of my way." Saber roared, swinging her silver longsword with force. She knocked Berserker and his stone blade aside, slamming him into the grassy square where their earlier battle had just ended. She didn't immediately follow up. Instead, a volley of black arrows rained down from outside the visible range, targeting the just-recovered Berserker. Despite being mindless, he still swung his stone sword with shocking agility, batting away most of the arrows. Still, one found its mark, detonating with a thunderous boom. As the smoke curled upward, Rin stared at the scene, trying to gauge the result. But Sakura had already raised her staff. Ice wall. A clear, towering wall of ice erupted from the earth without warning. Berserker, charging straight from the smoke in an attempt to rush the masters, had no time to change course. He crashed into the several-meter-high wall. It cracked under impact, but the spell hadn't finished. Berserker was caught halfway through, locked in the ice. Saber seized the chance and rushed in, her sword wreathed in red lightning as she struck down. But her blade was blocked by Berserker's stone weapon. The ice wall spell had finished, but the bind was only temporary. No longer expanding, the ice around Berserker began to splinter outward in a spiderweb of cracks. "Run wild." Crimson lightning. Saber unleashed all the mana in her body in a single burst, cleaving both Berserker and the ice apart, slamming him hard into the ground and leaving a crater half a person deep. As she leapt back, a second wave of arrows came down, striking the exposed back of the Berserker. The resulting explosion was even more violent than before. But when the smoke cleared, he was still standing, completely unscathed amid the ruined terrain. "Damn it, he's seriously tough," Saber muttered, lowering her body and readying for another strike. From his new sniping position, Archer let loose another arrow, this one whistling through the air aimed directly at Berserker's temple. Even Saber had to admit, if she took a hit like that to the head, it'd be game over. Yet, almost as if he were exposing a weakness on purpose, Berserker made no attempt to block or dodge. He could have, but he didn't. And he remained completely unharmed. Innsburn stood atop a platform overlooking the field, gazing down coldly without a word. Completely unmoved by the overwhelming power gap. "It's like he's showing off on purpose," Sakura murmured. "I never expected a mindless Berserker to be this strong." As she spoke, she drew a massive surge of mana, spun her staff, and opened a gate above Berserker into imaginary number space. A torrential storm of dark purple magical spears came crashing down. And this time, the expression on the homunculus girl finally changed. Chapter 150. Unlike before, when it felt like hitting solid steel no matter how hard she struck, this time Berserker let out a bestial roar, swatted away the rain of magic spears, and quickly leapt beyond the attack range. Though his body was riddled with wounds, healing rapidly before their eyes, Sakura's assault had clearly inflicted real damage. "Not bad." Actually managing to wound Berserker, came Innsburn's distant voice. "Ha." Sakura took a deep breath to shake off the sudden fatigue from the massive expenditure of mana, and Rin quickly stepped up to support her. Sakura lifted a hand to signal she was fine, then looked toward the Berserker. "Just as I thought. Anything less than an E-rank noble phantasm is completely ineffective against that behemoth." That was why she had gathered a vast amount of mana to cast a grand magecraft on par with an A-rank noble phantasm. The intense energy drain had left her momentarily weakened, like someone forced into a full sprint from a standstill. For an ordinary magus, casting such a spell would have been instantly fatal. But now, a new issue had emerged. Unless Mordred's noble phantasm was unleashed with its true name, It wouldn't be enough to harm Berserker in his current state. So, do we go for the noble phantasm release? Mordred asked via telepathy after hearing Sakura's analysis. Sakura glanced around and made a decision. Not yet. Let's keep probing for now. This open terrain favors him too much. Let's try shifting the fight toward the cemetery. Understood. Without hesitation, Saber lunged at Berserker, taking advantage of the moment before his wounds fully healed to push the attack, subtly guiding him away from the battlefield. You're overthinking things. Finish them off, Berserker, Innsburn muttered coldly as she watched Berserker being steadily drawn away, then began walking in the same direction as the two servants. Sister, what are you thinking? Sakura asked, turning to Rin. Rin's eyes stayed locked on Innsburn's retreating figure heading into the woods. You said it yourself. Even A-rank noble phantasms can't seriously injure that Berserker, Rin said, her brow furrowed. Which means we'll have to go back to the standard Holy Grail war strategy. She had no time to dwell on or question how Sakura had managed to unleash a grand magecraft of such magnitude. Think it'll go that smoothly? Sakura looked up again. Despite Innsburn's slow gait, she had already vanished from sight. Archer, keep looking for a new vantage point. Sakura and I will intercept Innsburn's master. With that, the sisters took off, pursuing the shifting battlefield. Understood, Rin. I'll keep monitoring the situation and decide our next move, Archer replied coolly from atop a building in Shinto. He was well aware of how formidable Berserker was. But he hadn't expected Saber to be Mordred. Even more surprising was Sakura. I don't remember her being this skilled a magus, Archer murmured, glancing back toward Fuiuki City. Several other presences lingered as well. Likely familiars or clairvoyants sent by the other masters to observe the battle. Elsewhere, as they ran through the forest, Rin listened while Sakura analyzed Innsburn's situation. After the previous Holy Grail war ended, Father helped hire Sviel von Innsburn's family break away from the Innsburn, Sakura said. Originally, we assumed the Fifth Holy Grail war wouldn't happen at all, since the Lesser Grail needed for preparations had been lost. Rin thought for a moment. It's hard to believe they'd give up so easily. The Holy Grail is the shared wish of all three families. Exactly. So, most likely, someone from the Mages Association. Someone interested in the Grail ritual. Offered support to the Innsburn, who'd had little prior contact with the association. They helped them create a new Lesser Grail, Sakura nodded. That would be the one calling herself Innsburn, the girl who claims to have no name. But the Innsburn's homunculus technology involved alchemy. It couldn't possibly be the Atlas Institute that helped them. Sakura ruled that out immediately. That group focused on retrieving contracts. They wouldn't bother with something like this. Unless the Innsburn somehow obtained a contract themselves. So that's why you think we can't underestimate them. Innsburn's master might be hiding something, Rin said. It's the only way to explain it. Sakura came to a stop. Apart from the main path leading to the cemetery, the woods behind the church were rarely traveled. A slight lapse in attention, and it was easy to get lost. Through the dense forest layers, the thunder of battle echoed from afar. Saber was still locked in combat with Berserker. That's why, if we're going after Innsburn, I'll take the lead, Sakura said, brushing her hand along the wand. Sister, cover me from the shadows. Alright, I'll follow your lead, Rin said, glancing her sister up and down. She didn't look especially intimidating, yet there was a steady, reassuring strength radiating from her. You've really grown, Sakura. Her eyes softened. Sakura gave an embarrassed smile. Well, I've got such an amazing sister. If I didn't try harder, it'd be like saying Dad made the wrong choice. Yeah. Rin flicked her hair, signaling she was done with that topic. You really do love your dad, huh? Can't go 3 sentences without bringing him up. What kind of kid hates their own father? Are you saying you're one of those? Sakura shot back, puffing her cheeks. Alright, Rin said, trying not to show how happy that made her. Just knowing Sakura was living a happier life than her filled her with energy. The two sisters exchanged a look, then split up at a fork in the woods, tracking Innsburn's magical trail from 2 angles. One ahead, one behind. As she ran through the forest, Rin could sense Sakura's mana, but there was no sign of Innsburn. Perhaps she'd never used magecraft to begin with, so her presence was masked beneath the auras of the servants and other masters. Too faint to pick out immediately. If that's the case. Rin was deep in thought when she suddenly spotted a silver-haired girl walking slowly up a slope ahead. Found her. Joy surged in her chest, and as she began to gather Gander in her hand, her foot caught on something. Like an invisible thread hidden in the darkness. A disturbing sound rang out. Her instincts kicked in. She spun around and fired Gander in a serpentine arc, striking the ambush coming from behind. TCH. Rin gritted her teeth as she looked up at the familiar floating between the trees. woven entirely from silver threads. Just as I expected. Die by your own foolishness, Tasaka. The cold voice came from behind. Insburn's emotionless declaration. Chapter 151, that Berserker's parameters surpass those of ordinary servants. He is easily in the realm of top-tier heroes. In the penthouse suite of a hotel in Shinto, Denkai Shiomi sat at the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the watery reflection conjured in the room. The rippling Magecraft mirror displayed a distant scene, the battle unfolding in the cemetery behind the Fuiuki church. Saber versus Berserker. He muttered absently to Morgan, who was lying on the bed beside him. How does he compare to me? Morgan asked. Shiomi paused, glancing over to find Morgan wrapped in a bathrobe. Her robe hung loosely off one shoulder, the chill elegance of her expression tinged with an alluring softness. You two are completely different types. Shiomi thought aloud. That man is probably one of those legendary heroes still remembered in modern times. Someone whose name is widely known. That kind of recognition would explain stats this high. In other words, he was benefiting from a fame bonus. You're not wrong. Morgan had no real intention of making Shiomi compare them seriously. Though both berserkers, the one summoned in this Holy Grail War was a textbook example. Deprived of reason by mad enhancement, but with stats that pushed every threshold. By contrast, Morgan, more magus than warrior, had a strength of C and endurance of E. There was no comparison. She rose from the bed, walked barefoot to the minibar, and pulled out 2 cans of beer. She handed one to Shiomi, who was still watching the battle in the mirror. The cold can against his cheek startled him. Beer, huh? He cracked it open and took a sip. You've barely been back and already you're glued to that water mirror instead of taking a break, Morgan said lazily, half-lidded eyes watching him as she swirled her own can. Are you that worried about Sakura? She's a magus trained by me, you know. No one else has ever had that privilege. She was subtly telling him to relax. As someone not officially part of this Holy Grail War, his priority should be covert observation. After all, just yesterday afternoon, Shiomi had told Morgan he was heading back to Fuiuki. He'd left the Grand Order decision at the clock tower in Karen's hands and had Gray accompany her. Then, taking the fastest flight available, he'd returned to Japan with Morgan and arrived in Fuiuki by noon. Instead of going home, he checked into a hotel in Shinto and began watching over the situation from the shadows. By nightfall, a significant surge of mana had erupted from the church. Clearly a servant clash. He'd been observing the battle ever since. Knowing how strong someone is one thing. Caring about them is another, Shiomi said, sipping his beer. And I didn't expect Sakura's servant to be Mordred. As a servant, she's not weak, Morgan replied flatly. Besides, Mordred was created by the version of me from this world using Artoria as a template. Her base abilities aren't that far off from Artoria's. No, what I mean is, this changes things. We'll probably need to operate separately and stay out of sight for a while, Shiomi said. If you ran into Mordred, conflict would be hard to avoid. Sharp as always, my husband, Morgan said with a smirk, clinking her can against his. That's exactly what a certain someone did during the last Holy Grail War. Shiomi chuckled. Maybe so. But when Garrett Suguemiya was working in the shadows, he only had Miyahisa. I've got you. Hey. Morgan leaned against him, one hand slipping into his robe to stroke his collarbone. I'm not trying to interrogate you, but I'd still like to know. What made you change your mind? Shiomi had originally planned to let Sakura handle the Holy Grail War on her own. But now, he'd come back to Fuiuki and was quietly keeping watch. I got hold of a rather important piece of intel. Haven't confirmed it yet, but that's exactly why I needed to come back and see for myself, Shiomi said. I'll tell you when it's time. You were just saying how you wanted to let the kids be independent, Morgan noted, not at all bothered by his change in attitude. That doesn't mean I can sit and watch Sakura walk into battle and die, Shiomi said, eyes on the distant graveyard. Besides, there's something strange about the Insburn's Lesser Grail this time. Relax. That berserker alone won't be enough to take down Sakura and Mordred, Morgan said as she turned his face toward her and kissed him firmly. Really now? Shiomi got the message, wrapped his arms around her, and let go of the battle in the mirror. The battle at the church cemetery raged on. Unlike the wide-open grassy field outside, the tighter terrain here severely limited berserker's mobility. Saber used that to her advantage, landing several blows that left gashes across his body. Though the wounds regenerated quickly and didn't seem to slow him down, Saber had already realized that her sword alone wasn't enough to pierce his defense. Taking inspiration from her master's earlier support, she began channeling mana into her blade, enhancing each strike through the amplification function of Clarent, the brilliantly shining royal sword. Combined with the lingering effect of the rune Sakura had placed on her, Mordred's strikes only grew fiercer. With another mana-infused swing, she deflected Berserker's attack, sending his massive body crashing behind several gravestones. Just as she prepared to charge again, an explosion erupted from the forest nearby. What? She turned instinctively. But in that moment, Berserker surged forward and brought his stone sword crashing down. Saber blocked the blow but didn't immediately counter. Instead, she took the opportunity to glance toward the source of the explosion. Dust billowed from the trees, and the sound of splintering trunks followed. Then, Sakura burst from the woods, carrying Rin. The two of them fired off volleys of magical projectiles at a swarm of a dozen or more silver familiars. Behind the silver tide, Insburn emerged slowly, ascending the slope. While Saber had been locked in combat, Sakura and Rin had evidently clashed with Insburn in a separate battle between masters. From the looks of it, Rin had likely walked into a trap, and Sakura had arrived just in time to pull her out of danger, retreating under the pressure of the familiar's assault. Just then, Berserker shifted tactics. With sudden force, he shoved Saber back and broke from their engagement. What? Saber's instincts flared. In an instant, Berserker leapt backward, flipped in midair, and launched himself toward Sakura and Rin. Insburn had seized the moment, altering her strategy to target the masters directly, hoping to finish them off while they were still regaining their footing. She narrowed her eyes, that frigid expression tinged with a flicker of confidence. At this distance, even Archer's support was limited. He had just loosed a barrage of arrows to bring down the familiars chasing the sisters. You bastard! Saber flared with mana, slammed her foot against the ground, and shot forward toward Berserker. But she was one step too late. Berserker's stone blade was already descending, on course to strike down both masters before Saber could intercept. Chapter 152, however, the massive stone sword, taller even than Sakura, didn't crush the two girls into pulp like Rin sauce and Sakura sauce as expected. Berserker was using all his strength, yet the blade couldn't push any further. Sakura's wand flew from her hand, spinning rapidly through the air like a glowing, circular shield. Juwicht, Doppelung? From behind her, Rin hurled a piece of obsidian into the air. It scattered into countless streaks of silver light, which fell like shooting stars, transforming into a descending stone canopy that interfered with the Berserker's sword strike. Even so, it only slightly weakened the blow. It wasn't enough to fully stop his assault. But it was enough. Sakura seized the opening, pulled Rin back, and the two of them vanished from sight.